Chapter 727. The call was from ICM's Kapoor Sid. After Columbia confirmed that they were going to make a Godzilla movie, they immediately started to look for a director. Joe Johnston, who had just produced Jurassic Park 2, was the most suitable director. On the other hand, most of the actors, directors, and producers who had a close relationship with Firefly had contracts with ICM. Due to the anti-monopoly law, although the two parties did not have any direct interests among the three major agencies, ICM had always had a close relationship with Firefly. Therefore, the news of Sony trying to poach Firefly reached Eric. Bill Mechanic was a veteran manager in Hollywood, and his information was not hard to find. His management style was conservative, and he was cautious. After Sony appointed Bill Mechanic as the CEO of Columbia, Eric thought that Sony would give up on their strategy of throwing money at Columbia and start to make money step by step. But when he heard that Sony was going to start production of Godzilla, Eric was sure that Sony would still follow the same path as in his previous life. In the original spacetime, although Sony fired Peter Guber and John Peters, the two big parasites, they still did not restrain their strategy of blindly throwing money to find a sense of existence. Not only did they offer Jim Carrey the first $20 million salary in Hollywood history, but they also blindly invested in many big productions that ended in failure. Among them, the 1998 version of Godzilla was undoubtedly the most typical failure. Due to Godzilla's worldwide popularity, Sony was ambitious to make it into a trilogy during the early stages of preparation. They even invited Roland Emmerich, who had a huge box office success with Lone Ranger Day, to star in the movie. However, in many things, the greater the expectation, the greater the disappointment. In his memory, the 1998 version of Godzilla was not only rated as childish, tacky, inexplicable, and illogical, but most of the fans' complaints were focused on Godzilla in the movie. The reason why Godzilla was called the King of the Monsters was mainly because of his powerful combat strength. The Japanese version of Godzilla not only had an indestructible body and powerful attack methods such as radiation heat, but also could withstand nuclear bomb attacks. Occasionally, he would even be called out to fight against alien invasions. This was the true king of the monsters, who could destroy everything in his path. Looking at the 1998 version of Godzilla, the first reaction of most Godzilla fans after watching the movie was, "Are you King kidding me?" It was one thing for the dignified king of monsters to abandon the classic image of the Japanese version and be designed as a Tyrannosaurus Rex with a dorsal fin. But what was with the fact that he was so weak that he couldn't move after being entangled by the steel cables of the bridge? Was Godzilla really that weak? That was fine, but the most intolerable thing was that Mr. Tyrannosaurus dorsalis was hit by a few missiles from the American military and died just like that. Dead, dead, dead. Moreover, before he died, he did not struggle, nor did he fight back. At the last moment of his life, Mr. Tyrannosaurus Rex chose to look at the male lead affectionately. His eyes were full of love and reluctance to part with the male lead. He said to the woman behind the male lead, "You got his body, but I got his heart." After that, he died peacefully. Only the poor audience in the movie theater were left complaining endlessly. If you die, so be it. The public will not be angry if such a weak Godzilla doesn't die. But why did you have to cosplay as King Kong before you died? In Eric's memory, the box office of Godzilla was not a complete failure, but its reputation was so bad that it was often dragged out by movie fans more than 10 years later. After the movie was released, it was not only nominated for the Worst Remake, Worst Director, Worst Screenplay, Worst Supporting Actress, etc. It was also condemned by movie fans all over the world. Godzilla's copyright holder, Toho, originally wanted to end the series after the 22nd Godzilla movie in 1995. But after the 1998 version of Godzilla was released, in order to restore the image of Godzilla in the hearts of movie fans, they had to start the series again. They only stopped after the 28th movie. In the end, the 1998 version of Godzilla was even named Zilla without the God prefix. After knowing that Sony was going to start the Godzilla project, Eric started to think about how to develop this project in the direction he wanted it to go. Under his influence, the history of Hollywood had changed a lot. Eric was not sure if Godzilla would be a failure like in his previous life if there was a change of director. So, he quickly made up his mind to lead Godzilla in the same direction as in his previous life. Although Sony was more determined than Panasonic in the movie business, Eric did not believe that Sony would persist like in his previous life if they continued to fail. Furthermore, Sony was destined to lose this Spider-Man series as a last resort. In the current Hollywood, there were not many directors who were suitable to direct Godzilla. Cameron was one, Spielberg was another, and of course, Eric himself was another. There were also Joe Johnston, Roland Emmerich, Gene de Bont, Paul Van Hoven, and a few others. Most of these people were related to Firefly. After all, in recent years, the most successful batch of special effects blockbusters in Hollywood came from Firefly. Cameron, Roland Emmerich, and the others also accumulated enough experience in special effects films with Firefly's unstinting support. If Fong Yu wanted Godzilla to repeat the same mistakes, pushing Roland Emmerich to Sony was the easiest and most direct way. Therefore, what Eric wanted to do was very simple. He only needed to stop Sony from looking for other directors. Cameron did not need to worry about this. He was currently producing Titanic, and Sony would not be able to do anything to him. Joe Johnston had signed an option contract with Firefly before he took on Jurassic Park 2. Even if Sony could offer $20 million, it would not be enough to cover the penalty. So, Cameron did not need to consider. Eric was not worried about the other directors. Before eliminating the top few directors, Eric believed that Sony would not settle for the second best. Then, the most unstable factor was Spielberg. Jaws, the movie that made Old Sea famous in the past, is actually a monster movie. Without a doubt, even if Eric purposely did not do anything, Sony would still choose Spielberg over Roland Emmerich. Of course, there were no absolutes in this world. Now, Roland Emmerich had the best opportunity to increase his competitiveness. It must be known that Day of Independence was definitely the peak of Roland Emmerich's directing career. While Eric was paying close attention to Sony's Godzilla preparations, Hollywood was still reaping the box office in full swing. Among them, the weekly box office performance of Forrest Gump was not high, but it was definitely the most eye-catching one. With a box office of $47 million in the first week, it averaged $30,000 for 1,500 screens, which far exceeded the standard of a blockbuster with an average of $10,000. Then, on June 16, Firefly's Toy Story 2 was released. It topped the weekly box office rankings with $69 million in the first week. Jurassic Park 2 had a box office of $77 million in the second week. After a 45% drop in the total box office to $217 million, the box office in the third week also dropped by 49%, earning $39.25 million. Relatively speaking, Forrest Gump only dropped by 18% in the second week, earning $39.2 million. Jurassic Park only had a slight advantage of $50,000. It barely held on to its runner-up position. On the 23rd of June, Time Warner's Batman Forever had a polarizing reputation. Comic book fans were drooling while happily forking out money to watch the action of several famous villains on the big screen. Forrest Gump finally showed its strength. From the 23rd of June to the 29th of June, the box office earnings of Batman Forever were released. Although Batman Forever was at the top with a box office earnings of $78 million, everyone's attention was firmly attracted by the second-place Forrest Gump, with a box office earnings of $35 million. The box office earnings of Toy Story 2 had dropped to $33 million, ranking third. Jurassic Park 2 continued to follow the step-by-step commercial box office trend and dropped 40%, earning $23.5 million, ranking fourth. Unknowingly, in 3 weeks, the box office earnings of Forrest Gump had unexpectedly accumulated $122 million. It had completely broken out of the category of indie films and reached the level of a box office blockbuster. Moreover, according to the popularity and the weekly box office decline trend, box office evaluation agencies adjusted the box office expectations of Forrest Gump again and again. When the box office earnings of the third week were released, everyone was surprised to find that most box office evaluation agencies and media had unknowingly set the box office expectations of Forrest Gump at $300 million. Although the 4-week box office earnings of Jurassic Park 2 had reached $279 million and the total box office earnings of $300 million was just around the corner, few people doubted that Forrest Gump had unknowingly shown the strength to compete with Jurassic Park 2 for the annual box office. The most excited about the box office results of Forrest Gump was of course the producer, Flower Pictures. The most complicated one was undoubtedly Sony Columbia, which lost the distribution rights of Forrest Gump and Amazing Night at the Museum to Eric because of the dispute between Men in Black and Game of Bravehearts at the beginning of the year. When Sony found out that they were willing to give up on Forrest Gump, which could bring them at least $100 million for Men in Black and Game of the Brave, some shareholders even publicly questioned the decision of the U.S. branch. If it wasn't for Nobuyuki Dai personally endorsing Howard Stringer, the newly appointed U.S. branch director might have resigned. After the controversy, Howard Stringer was more determined to get rid of the shadow of the Fireflies and make Godzilla a blockbuster series. After his intention to invite Joe Winston to direct Godzilla was directly rejected, Howard Stringer quickly set his eyes on Spielberg. However, Howard Stringer was better than the German film investors who only chose big stars and didn't care whether they were outdated or not. Because Jurassic Park was taken away by Eric, although Spielberg's films in the past 2 years had good box office earnings, they were not too dazzling. His box office miracles, Jaws and E.T., were from more than 20 years ago. What's more, Captain Hook, which Columbia and Spielberg collaborated on a few years ago, also failed amidst the overwhelming praise in the early stages. Moreover, in recent years, Spielberg had been maintaining a close cooperation with Universal Pictures. Ghost and the Fairies, which had a good box office at the beginning of this year's summer, was the result of the cooperation between Spielberg's Amperlin Pictures and Universal. This fantasy family comedy had tenaciously achieved more than $80 million in box office under the crushing of a blockbuster like Jurassic Park 2. It was even said that the new studio he was about to set up with David Geffen would also be affiliated with Universal. Therefore, Howard Stringer's confidence in inviting Spielberg was not so firm. Under such hesitant circumstances, Day of Independence was released. Independence Day, which was released on June 30th, grossed $56 million in the first 3 days. As the Independence Day holiday of July 4th was a working day in the U.S., the box office on that day did not decrease but increased instead. Therefore, with strong word of mouth and strong marketing, the box office for Independence Day reached $85 million in the first week, exceeding the production cost of $75 million. According to the distribution rules, the producers and distributors would usually get 90% of the box office in the first week. Therefore, in theory, Firefly should have recovered all the production cost in the first week. Back then, the great collision of Earth and Earth had already propelled Roland Emmerich to the ranks of A-list directors. The box office results of Independence Day had also propelled Roland Emmerich's reputation to new heights. Also, Howard Stringer was pleasantly surprised to find that Roland Emmerich was not bound by an option contract like Joe Winston. This meant that as long as they paid enough, Sony could invite Roland Emmerich to direct Godzilla. The question now was, if Sony sent an invitation to Roland Emmerich, how would Firefly react? Although Howard Stringer wanted to get rid of Firefly's shadow, he knew very well that it was impossible to completely get rid of Firefly's influence. At least, in terms of special effects, the film definitely needed technical support from the digital field. Chapter 728. $20 million and 15% of the box office in North America. Haha, Firefly will not be able to make such an offer. Eric smiled and shook his head as he said to Roland Emmerich. It was July 7th, and the two of them were having breakfast at a restaurant in Beverly Hills. Roland Emmerich told Eric about Sony's offer for him to direct Godzilla. Howard Stringer was a smart man. He wanted to poach Roland Emmerich to direct Godzilla, but he did not contact Firefly directly. Instead, he gave Roland Emmerich an offer that he could not refuse. Howard Stringer then gave Roland Emmerich the task of getting Firefly's forgiveness. If the box office for Godzilla could be on par with Day of Independence and reach around $300 million in North America, then Roland Emmerich would be able to get $65 million from this project. Even if Roland Emmerich failed miserably at the box office, he would still be able to maintain an income of more than $20 million. Firefly would definitely not give out such a condition. Of course, Firefly wasn't stingy either. The box office of Day of Independence exploded. In addition to the initial $8 million fixed salary, according to the corresponding sharing agreement, Roland Emmerich could still receive over $20 million from the follow-up earnings of Day of Independence. In total, Day of Independence could bring him $30 million in income. The number of directors in Hollywood who could get $30 million from a single film can be counted with one hand. This was also the way Eric had been working with Firefly. Lower the fixed salary and use the appropriate share of profits to tie the profits of the film to the box office earnings. Both parties would share the risk. For a company like Sony, they had offered $20 million before the film was even released. They even included a high percentage of the box office earnings. They were simply taking advantage of their wealth to do whatever they wanted. Roland Emmerich saw that Eric was not angry after hearing that he would be working for Sony. He was still smiling and was slightly relieved. Although he had never seen this young man angry, he was not naive enough to think that Eric was someone without a temper. Roland Emmerich had a great time working with Firefly on both Crash and Lone Ranger Day. He knew that it was because of these two movies that he was able to reach his current position. He was not an ungrateful person. Under normal circumstances, even if there was no contract, he would still be willing to continue working with Firefly. But this time, Sony's offer was too much for him to reject. Anyway, I am sorry, Eric. I am afraid I will not be able to direct The Day After Tomorrow. Although Roland Emmerich was relieved, he still had a regretful expression on his face. Firefly was at its peak, but Eric's influence in Hollywood was still growing. Unless it was absolutely necessary, Roland Emmerich did not want to anger Eric. Roland Emmerich thought for a while and said, "Eric, everyone is looking forward to your new film. Maybe it is a good choice for you to direct The Day After Tomorrow." "Let's see how it goes," Eric said non-committally with a smile. Sony was ambitious to make Godzilla into a trilogy. In theory, Roland Emmerich would not be able to direct Firefly's film in the next few years. Eric was still not comfortable with this. If Roland Emmerich gave up on directing The Day After Tomorrow, Firefly's filming schedule would have to be adjusted accordingly. However, when Roland Emmerich was invited to direct The Great Clash of Worlds, Roland Emmerich only signed 2 contracts with Firefly. After Independence Day was completed, both parties' contracts were fulfilled. Although Firefly had the priority to renew the contract, they would not be able to offer Sony a sky-high salary. Blocking someone's path to wealth was like killing their parents. Under these circumstances, it would be difficult for Firefly to force Roland Emmerich to stay. Of course, the reason why Eric let Roland Emmerich go so easily was because he was planning ahead for the next few years. Lyonnais's representative had arrived in Los Angeles and was negotiating with Amy Pascal, who was in charge of Flower Pictures. Once they got MGM, Flower Pictures would expand rapidly. On the other hand, although they had Sony's strong financial support, Sony could not continue operating Columbia TriStar at a loss because of Peter Guber's operations. If Sony's ambitious Godzilla series failed again, it would be a devastating blow to Sony's confidence in the movie business. At that time, Flower Pictures could take over Columbia and complete Eric's plan to expand Hollywood. Roland Emmerich did not know what Eric was thinking. Seeing him let him go so easily, he felt ashamed. Thus, the atmosphere at breakfast inevitably became awkward. The two of them chatted casually and hurriedly finished their breakfast. Roland Emmerich took the initiative to pay the bill and left the restaurant. Although Howard Stringer still hoped that he could talk to Eric about entrusting Digital Domain to be in charge of the special effects for Godzilla, Roland Emmerich was already feeling guilty. It was hard for him to talk about it, so he decided to leave this troublesome matter to Sony to deal with. After Roland Emmerich left, Eric did not rush to the office. He asked the waiter to remove the cutlery and ordered a cup of coffee. He then leisurely read today's newspaper. In the weekly box office announcement of the Los Angeles Times Entertainment section, the #1 movie was Lone Ranger Day, which had earned $85 million, followed by Universal Pictures' new film, the famous Apollo 13. Although the male lead was no longer Tom Hanks, the film still managed to earn more than $43 million in the first week's box office, ranking second, based on the film's excellent quality and reputation. Although Universal Pictures had experienced the turbulence of the acquisition at the beginning of the year, they still maintained good box office results during the summer. Ghost and Elf and Apollo 13 at the end of May did not have high production costs. Although the results were far from comparable to Firefly, it was enough to make Universal's summer box office results look good. Although Michael Eisner's strong and capricious character was not likable, after he took over Universal and started over, it seemed that the drive he had when he ran Disney in the 1980s had been stimulated. Eric remembered that in the next 10 years, Universal Pictures would continue to be turbulent in the process of repeatedly changing owners. He just didn't know how many big changes he could take on at Universal. After Apollo 13, it was Batman Forever, which was released in the second week. It grossed $42 million and ranked third. Next, Forrest Gump made $28 million at the box office, with a slight drop of 20%, and ranked fourth. The total box office for 4 weeks was $150 million. The box office of Toy Story 2 had just reached $28.02 million and was ranked fifth, with a total box office of $130 million. It had also started a long run, but it was definitely not as strong as Forrest Gump. The total box office was expected to be around $200 million. In addition, Jurassic Park 2 only made $14 million in the fifth week after its 4-week total box office reached $280 million. It was estimated that the box office for the next week would exceed $300 million. But at the same time, the weekly box office would fall below $1 million and enter the final stage. In just 1 month, the weekly box office had fallen from $140 million to $14 million. It was inevitable that there would be comments in the newspapers about Firefly's distribution strategy. They said that Firefly's 3,500 screens in the first week of production had overused the box office potential of Jurassic Park 2. If Firefly's scheduling strategy had been more conservative, the box office curve would have been better. Eric just laughed off such comments. Anyone with a discerning eye could see that in recent years, Firefly had almost occupied the entire June schedule. In order to avoid direct confrontation with Firefly's films, several other major film companies had adopted the strategy of advancing or delaying the release of their films. If Firefly had not needed Lone Ranger Day to cater to American Lone Ranger Day on July 4th, the film would have been released a week earlier. It was also because of this that Warner Brothers dared to release Batman Forever on June 23rd, which was supposed to be the last box office bomb for Firefly during the summer. It was precisely because of Firefly's action of occupying the June schedule that other film companies had released their main films in July. Starting with Universal's Apollo 13 and Lone Ranger Day on June 30th, there were 2 new main films released almost every week in July. For example, on July 7th, Fox's Liar, starring Jim Carrey, and Time Warner's Future Waterworld, on July 14th, Night at the Museum and Evaporation Order, and on July 21st, 007's GoldenEye and Thief of Fire. Under this intensive bombardment of new films, if Firefly did not try to exploit the box office of Jurassic Park 2 in June as much as possible, they would still be quickly squeezed out by a large number of new films in July. Eric hurriedly scanned through today's major newspapers and noticed that Kevin Costner's Future Waterworld would be released today, so he picked up his phone and dialed Amy Pascal's number, reminding her to pay attention to the movements of Future Waterworld and to choose the right time to start negotiations with Kevin Costner for Mission Impossible 2. Although he did not see the finished film, Warner's $175 million wasteland on water movie tickets were destined to have a dismal ending. Including last year's even worse Western Law Enforcement, during the summer, Kevin Costner had already failed twice in major productions. In this case, Flower Pictures would have a lot of initiative in the negotiations for Mission Impossible 2. Although they had Eric's strong support, in the process of acquiring MGM, Flower Pictures would still have to solve part of the financing themselves. The first Mission Impossible movie had a global box office of more than $500 million, which was a very impressive result. Finalizing the contract for the sequel to Mission Impossible would undoubtedly increase the financing chips for Flower Pictures. Chapter 729. Burbank, Firefly Headquarters. Seeing the two iconic figures, one tall and one short, walk into the office building, the passing employees greeted them enthusiastically. "Good morning, Carolyn, Melanie." "Good morning, Lenice." "Good morning, Mr. Weissman." "Good morning, Jean." The petite Carolyn Wilson politely used a special accent to greet the people she passed by. Americans usually had a very complicated attitude towards British people. If someone frequently spoke to them with the arrogant tone of a British aristocrat, they would most likely feel a strong dislike. However, the purity and sincerity of the petite girl in front of them made them unable to produce any negative feelings. There were even quite a few young male employees who, in order to hear a simple "good morning" from the girl, specifically inquired about the work schedule of the two girls and deliberately created opportunities to meet them. Melanie Garretson, who was beside Carolyn, held on to her breakfast and pretended to be very busy. She merely nodded her head in acknowledgement with her eyes. As she ate her sandwich in a carefree manner, she rolled her eyes at the fellow from the distribution department called Jean. Those cowardly fellows only knew how to greet Carolyn every day. However, due to the rumors about Carolyn and Eric, they did not dare to strike up a conversation. After working in Eric's assistant office for nearly a year, Melanie's understanding of her boss had far surpassed what it was before. The more she knew, the more she felt that there was no possibility of Carolyn and Eric being together. In order to pull Carolyn's thoughts away from Eric, Melanie even tried to introduce a boyfriend to her, but in the end, it was all for naught. Eric's assistant office was on the 6th floor. In order to finish breakfast before reaching the office, Melanie pulled Carolyn up the stairs. When they reached the 6th floor, Melanie had just finished eating her breakfast. A tissue was handed over from the side. Melanie did not hesitate to wipe her mouth and said with a smile, "Carolyn still loves me the most." "If you sleep in again next time, I won't help you prepare breakfast," Carolyn said with a small threat. Melanie threw the tissue into the trash can without feeling anything. She tidied her hair and said with a smile, "If I didn't help you drink a few glasses of wine at the party last night, you would be the one who couldn't get up today." Carolyn retorted, "You're clearly the one who forced me to go." "I didn't even want to go. I'm not familiar with those people. I'm doing this for your own good. You're about to become a little nun. All you know is to work, work, work. When you're free, you'll become a love-struck fool. Sigh, you're incurable. I'm not. I feel that my current lifestyle is very good." Carolyn's face turned slightly red from Melanie's last sentence, but she still defended herself. She was a simple girl and was very satisfied with her current life. She had a job with a good salary and could support herself without relying on her family. She also had some good friends who cared about her. More importantly, not only was she working for him, she could also occasionally see him. Although she was simple, she was not stupid. In fact, she was smarter than most people. However, although she knew that this one-sided love would not produce any results, she was not willing to force herself to accommodate others. She only secretly thought that when she felt that she did not like him that much anymore, she would leave. Eric's assistant office was a very special existence in the Firefly Group. Although it was located in the Firefly Group's headquarters, it was an important hub for communication between Eric and all the businesses under his name. According to Eric's original arrangement, Carolyn and Melanie were in charge of matters related to Yahoo, Cisco, and AOL. They also led a team of 6 people, including the 2 of them. Relying on her special relationship with Eric and her own outstanding work ability, Carolyn was promoted by Kelly at the beginning of the year as the team leader of this team. Although this had caused some staff members who had the potential to take on this position to leave, Carolyn had already obtained everyone's recognition over the past half a year. After all, the most important aspect of this position wasn't the ability to deal with people. Instead, it was the ability to gather, organize, and coordinate information. In this aspect, No one dared to say that they were more outstanding than this little girl who was able to imprint a thick professional textbook into her mind after just reading it once. The two walked into the office and greeted the other colleagues. Carolyn went to her desk, turned on the computer, and prepared to start the day's work. Yahoo was about to hold a 5-day annual meeting from July 10th to July 14th. During this period, there were many major events such as the launch of Yahoo's online products, the Yahoo Advertising Alliance Conference, and the Yahoo Technology Alliance Conference. Recently, their team had to receive information from Boston about the preparations for the annual meeting every day. After sorting it out, they would submit it to Eric for review. Occasionally, some of Eric's special treatment suggestions would be sent back to Boston. In addition, Eric also gave them some other tasks. The East Coast was 3 hours earlier than the West Coast. When Carolyn opened her mailbox, it was already full of more than 20 unread emails. After carefully reading all the emails, Carolyn had just opened the email interface and was about to copy the 2 more important emails directly to Kelly Haynes when she heard the sound of high heels walking towards her. She looked up and happened to see Kelly walking towards her. "Good morning, Ms. Haynes." Carolyn stood up from her office cubicle. "Morning, Carolyn." Kelly nodded with a smile and handed the folder in her hand to Carolyn. Carolyn recognized that the document was the schedule of Yahoo's annual meeting that she had just sorted out yesterday. She asked with some apprehension, "Ms. Haynes, is there something wrong?" "Of course not." Kelly shook her head and said, "I need to rush to Praia Vista immediately. There is an impromptu meeting there that I need to attend. Eric will come over at 10 o'clock to look at these documents. You can send them to him for me. These documents happen to be sorted out by you personally. If he doesn't understand anything, he can ask you directly." "But Ms. Haynes..." Carolyn was about to say something when Kelly picked up her handbag and said, "No buts. That's all. Carolyn, I'll go first." Melanie heard Kelly's words. After Kelly left the office, she poked her head out from the cubicle next to her and smiled at Carolyn, who was holding a folder in a daze. "Carolyn, do you want me to report to the boss on your behalf?" "No." Carolyn subconsciously refused. However, she quickly realized that Melanie was teasing her. The other colleagues in the office also laughed softly. Carolyn shyly glared at Melanie and quickly sat down. She hid herself in the cubicle and looked at her watch. There were still 15 minutes before 10 o'clock. She quickly flipped through the documents, intending to go through the documents that she had memorized by heart once again, just in case. At 10 o'clock, Eric had just sat down in his office. A few minutes later, the secretary outside knocked on the door and let a small figure in. "Hi, Carolyn." Eric raised his head. He wasn't surprised to see Carolyn walk in. His secretary had just informed him that Kelly had rushed to Praia Vista at the last minute. "Hi, Eric." Carolyn walked over and handed the documents in her hand to Eric. "This is the schedule of Yahoo's events from the 10th to the 14th. Eric smiled and took the documents. He gestured for Carolyn to take a seat and instructed his secretary to make 2 cups of coffee. Then, he lowered his head and flipped through the documents. Chapter 730. Initially, Yahoo's management team only planned to hold a low-key Yahoo Technology Alliance and Advertising Alliance conference to announce new technology products to Yahoo's partners and discuss business cooperation. After Eric came up with a plan to mislead his competitors in New York, the scale of the annual meeting was greatly increased and a special budget was allocated. In the end, the annual meeting was divided into 2 main sections: the Yahoo Product Launch for users and the Yahoo Technology and Advertising Alliance Conference for partners. At the same time, according to Eric's idea, in order to expand their influence, Yahoo sent invitations to many high-tech companies, including Microsoft, Cisco, AOL, and other senior executives. There were also countless invitations to media reporters from all over the world. After more than a month of hype, the media speculated that Yahoo not only wanted to turn this annual meeting into an annual event for the internet industry, but they also wanted to further confirm their position as the leader of the internet industry. Although Yahoo's scale was insignificant compared to giants such as Microsoft and Cisco, and it couldn't be compared to established high-tech companies such as IBM, HP, and Apple. However, Yahoo was valued at $5 billion by Wall Street 3 years ago, and no one could ignore Yahoo's strong growth potential. Therefore, Microsoft's Bill Gates was invited. Cisco's John Gates, Microsoft's Bill Gates, and AOL's Steve Jobs? Cass and other senior executives had already confirmed that they would attend the annual meeting. Katzenberg, as an important representative of Yahoo's media business, would also take time to attend. Nokia's Yoma Alala would also take this opportunity to come to the US to meet Eric. Qualcomm CEO, Owen Jacobs, was also invited. Jacob and the executives of Sprint. It could be said that this was also the first gathering of all the core figures of Eric's economic empire. Therefore, although the Yahoo annual meeting was a total of 5 days, Eric's schedule was calculated by the hour. Eric briefly looked at his schedule and opened the relevant plan for the Yahoo product launch. This was the 6th time Eric had seen this document in more than a month. After Eric made the decision to hold a product launch, the first proposal sent by Yahoo could only be described as terrible compared to the mature product launch format in Eric's memory. In the end, Eric had to personally take the time to use the information in his memory to come up with a simple plan and handed it to Yahoo to repeatedly modify according to the actual situation. Finally, the mature proposal in his hand today was finally produced. Because it was going to be televised, the press conference was shortened to 30 minutes. Therefore, there were no celebrity guests at the press conference, and there was no time for the executives to talk nonsense. Eric would not go on stage himself, and he left all the time for the key people in charge of Yahoo. Over the past month, Yahoo's advertising planning department spent most of their time on how to use these 30 minutes to show the content that Yahoo wanted to promote to the TV audience as much as possible. At the same time, they wanted to arouse the interest of these potential users as much as possible. In addition to a simple review of Yahoo's existing products, as well as recommending websites such as ABC News.com and Amazon.com, the product launch was mainly to promote Yahoo's personal homepage and Yahoo's online payment tool, Yahoo Pay, to users. In the current Internet 1.0 era, there was a lack of information on the Internet. Therefore, just like how movies and TV series were to the media industry, they had to find ways to expand the Internet content to provide enough soil for the development of the Internet industry. However, this task was impossible to complete with only professional media websites. The Yahoo information department that Brown was in charge of had expanded many times, and the number of employees was less than 1,000. These people could never provide enough content for the current 25 million US Internet users. Therefore, launching a personal homepage similar to Boxer's and using tens of millions of users to do this work would undoubtedly be twice the effort for half the results. Everyone had a desire to show off. As long as 1/5 of the current 25 million US users opened a personal homepage, and each person provided an average of 20 pages of new content per year, the entire Internet would add 100 million pages of content. Moreover, if the 100 million pages of content brought in 10 cents of advertising revenue per page per year for Yahoo, it would bring in $10 million a year. Eric knew that in the next few years, these numbers would be far more than that. Because the industry was still in its infancy, in 1995, there were only a handful of companies that had a revenue of more than $10 million. However, as long as Yahoo could maintain its strong position, with the explosive expansion of the Internet in the next few years, Yahoo's advertising revenue would also increase exponentially. On the other hand, the Internet e-commerce had just appeared. Even Amazon, the giant in the e-commerce industry in his previous life, was only a budding seedling. Therefore, most e-commerce platforms could not support a complete online payment system. This was the best time for Yahoo's online payment tool to enter the game. As long as this setup was completed, when everyone was used to using Yahoo Pay to make online payments in the future, disregarding the other profits brought by this online payment tool, just the interest of the tens of billions of floating deposits in users' accounts would bring in huge profits for Yahoo. When Eric saw the Yahoo Pay payment tool, he could not help but think of Amazon. When Yahoo launched the $100 million angel investment plan, Eric quickly found Jeff Bezos' name in a pile of project application documents. He specifically asked Yahoo's angel investment department to give the green light to this project. However, in the end, Bezos was only willing to sell 10% of his shares in exchange for Yahoo's $500,000 investment as startup capital. It was conceivable that if Yahoo did not follow up, the 10% of shares held by Jeff would follow suit. Bezos' further financing would be gradually diluted. Eric knew that he should not bite off more than he could chew. Therefore, he would not allow Yahoo to become too bloated. Whether it was now or in the future, Yahoo's core business would be on web portals, search engines, email, and other basic internet services. The profit model would also mainly rely on advertising and would not involve too much in e-commerce. Even the Yahoo Music Store in Eric's plan would be operated by a separate electronic product department. However, although Yahoo would not involve too much in this area, it was still very promising to invest in e-commerce websites. What's more, since he had encountered the budding Amazon, Eric certainly would not let it go so easily. After marking the name of Amazon in the document with a pencil, Eric looked up and was about to say something when he happened to see Carolyn looking away in a panic. Looking at Carolyn's red face, Eric realized that this girl was peeking at him just now. As a normal man, he did not lack the vanity of being noticed by the opposite sex. However, he just smiled. He knew that Carolyn was shy, so he did not tease her. He said, "Carolyn, help me prepare a copy of Amazon's information, and also give me a copy of their original proposal." "Oh, you know Amazon, right?" Carolyn saw that Eric did not tease her and was talking about business. She calmed down and nodded. "Is it Jeff? The online book sales website created by Bezos?" "Yes." "Also, make an appointment. I want to talk to him personally." Eric lowered his head and looked at the schedule for the next few days. His schedule during the day was definitely full, and only the night was left. On the night of the 10th, there was a cocktail party for the technology company executives who came to attend the annual meeting. On the night of the 11th, there was a party for the executives of the Firefly system. He continued to look at the schedule. On the night of the 12th, there was nothing else after 8 o'clock. Therefore, he looked up and said to Carolyn, "Let's do it on the night of the 12th, from 8 o'clock to 9 o'clock. Just choose the location at the hotel I'm staying at." "Okay, Eric." Carolyn nodded. She took out a memo and wrote it down. Her memory was very good, but she still carefully prepared a small memo according to the work habits of most people. After writing it down, Carolyn looked up and asked, "Eric, then, are there any problems with this information?" "No." Eric shook his head and closed the folder. He said, "Also, how is the information about the electronic players and ebooks that I asked you to prepare?" "It's almost done. But about the micro-hard drive research and development cooperation?" Carolyn hesitated and said, "I called every day this week, but there was no reply from IBM. They only said that their executives were still discussing it." Although they had temporarily decided to use the small hard drive developed by Toshiba as a storage medium for research and development, Eric still planned to entrust IBM to develop the micro-hard drive immediately. In the original space-time, IBM was the first manufacturer to come up with the micro-hard drive technology. Eric frowned and said, "It's been a week. Even if they don't intend to cooperate, they should have responded, right?" Carolyn looked at Eric's frown and thought for a while. Then she said, "Eric, I don't think IBM is a good partner." "Huh?" Eric looked up and motioned for Carolyn to continue. Carolyn said, "IBM has always been a company that relies heavily on government officials. Their decision-making committee has as many as 38 people. 3 years ago, IBM's board of directors appointed Lewis Carolyn to lead the company. 3 years ago, Arthur Gerstner made a series of reforms in the company and achieved good results. However, this kind of corporate disease cannot be changed in a short period of time. IBM's attitude has always been very slow, even to partners of the same level. I feel that even if they come to a conclusion, with IBM's arrogance, they will not agree to our cooperation proposal." The battery and LCD technologies for the electronic players and ebooks were already mature. The only difficulty was the storage medium. The current capacity of the flash drive was too small, so the only path left was the micro-hard drive. Currently, the major hard drive manufacturers had not developed the micro-hard drive yet. However, with their strong technical knowledge, it was not difficult to miniaturize the hard drive technology. Eric originally planned to pay a research and development fee to entrust IBM's hard drive department to develop the micro hard drive. Then, he would obtain the exclusive rights to the micro hard drive for a few years after it was successfully developed. This way, he could delay his competitors for 2 to 3 years. When Eric heard what Carolyn said, he remembered some information about IBM. It was said that IBM's internal hierarchy was very strict. During meetings, every executive had a seat of the same level as them. Even the company's internal work uniforms were of the same level. The strict hierarchy inevitably caused the company's management to be rigid and slow. No wonder there was no response from IBM for an entire week. At this time, Eric also realized that IBM was not a good partner. He wanted the exclusive rights to the micro hard drive. Simply put, after IBM developed the micro hard drive, Firefly would have the exclusive rights to the micro hard drive for the next few years. IBM would not be able to sell the micro hard drive to other manufacturers. This kind of research and development agreement was very common among technology companies. However, for a giant like IBM, the chances of Firefly getting the exclusive rights were very slim. "I didn't think about this matter carefully," Eric said. "Then, which manufacturer do you think is more suitable for us to cooperate with? Seagate or Western Digital? These two hard drive companies are in California. It is very convenient to cooperate with them. They have enough technical knowledge," Carolyn replied. "Also, the Japanese hard drive manufacturers have more advanced technology. However, companies like Toshiba and Hitachi are involved in the manufacturing of electronic products. If we cooperate with them, it will be easy to compete with us in the same type of electronic products in the future." Eric knew that after 2000, the Japanese electronics companies fell into decline because of slow transformation. They gradually became upstream component suppliers. However, Japanese electronic products currently maintained a very strong position in the world. Carolyn could not see what would happen in a few years. She was not wrong to say this. Eric himself did not like to cooperate with the Japanese, so he said, "Then contact Seagate and Western Digital. You can follow up on this matter personally. Try to get the results before the end of July." Okay. Carolyn nodded her head and earnestly wrote down the matter. Raising her head, she saw Eric looking at her. Her face turned slightly red as she asked, "Eric, what's the matter?" "Nothing, I was just thinking, do you need to write down these things?" "It's better to write it down. It's safer." Eric said, "I think you should talk to Buffett when you have time. He will definitely like you very much." Buffett is the kind of person who can store everything in his brain. When Metropolis acquired ABC in the 1980s, ABC invited an entire investment bank team, but Buffett is the only one in Metropolis. His brain is filled with all the acquisition information. Others would need hours to calculate the data on a computer, but he can casually say it out loud. "Ah, how can I compare to Mr. Buffett?" Carolyn shook her head and said embarrassedly. Chapter 731. It's indeed very difficult to become someone like Warren Buffett. In fact, if most people were able to attain his level of status and wealth, it would be extremely difficult for them to remain focused on something for a few decades. Eric looked at Carolyn's pretty little face and said, "However, I've discovered that you have some similar qualities to Warren Buffett. Ordinary people would always have too many distracting thoughts and desires in their hearts. In fact, this would become the greatest obstacle to a person's progress." However, Eric wasn't able to see any of these qualities in Carolyn. From the first time they met 2 years ago until now, this girl's simple and pure temperament hadn't changed much. Coupled with her exceptionally intelligent little brain, Eric believed that if Carolyn were to focus on developing herself in the direction of an investor like Warren Buffett, she would definitely be able to achieve extraordinary results in the future. Carolyn was a little embarrassed by Eric's praise. Unlike Eric, she wasn't familiar with Warren Buffett and didn't know if she had any similar qualities to Warren Buffett. She placed her little hand under the office desk and pinched the corner of her professional suit. She was too embarrassed to ask and only said, "Eric, if there's nothing else, I'm going back to work." Eric had a smile at the corner of his mouth as he teased, "You don't want to chat with me anymore?" Even though she knew that Eric was joking with her, Carolyn couldn't help but shake her head in a serious manner. But, it's working hours right now. Eric was very fond of Carolyn's somewhat old-fashioned appearance. He continued, "You're my assistant, so any of my requests can become part of your work. Even chatting with me counts." That's clearly not the case. Carolyn blinked her eyes and retorted. However, as she said that, Kelly's figure suddenly appeared in Carolyn's mind. She thought about how this mature, capable, and charming female superior would occasionally show intimacy with Eric, as well as the not-so-secret relationship between the two. Carolyn's little brain couldn't help but form a very absurd thought. Is this also part of a female assistant's work? If it is, then what if he asks me? As her thoughts deepened, Carolyn's small face unknowingly turned bright red. Her sparkling eyes secretly shot a glance at Eric, before quickly looking away. Seeing Carolyn's face turn red for no reason, Eric asked in amusement, "What naughty thoughts are you having?" No. Carolyn shrunk her neck and immediately stood up. "I'm going back to work." Without waiting for Eric's reply, Carolyn had already turned around and fled from Eric's office. It was as if she would be held down by the great Demon King if she was even a second slower. Alas, he dared to neglect his boss like this. It seemed that he had to be punished with a deduction of his salary. Eric thought to himself as he pressed the call button on the landline beside him. He called for the secretary outside and asked her to bring the memo that Carolyn had left on his desk to him. In July, most companies started to calculate their revenue for the first half of the year, and Firefly was no exception. With the rapid recovery of the American economy, Firefly's film, television, theme parks, and surrounding stores all maintained a very strong momentum of growth compared to the same period last year. Although the relevant data was still being calculated, there was no doubt that Firefly's total revenue for the first half of the year would exceed $10 billion. At the same time, Fortune magazine released its first ranking of the top 500 companies in the world in July. Before this, Fortune magazine only counted the top 500 companies in the United States. Although the bubble burst in the early 1990s, Japan still occupied 6 of the top 10 spots in the top 500 companies in the world. General Motors, which was the #1 company in the United States, was only ranked 5th in the entire list. The top 4 were all Japanese financial groups. Firefly's annual revenue of around $20 billion was very insignificant in front of the #1 company on the list, Mitsubishi Corporation's revenue of $175.8 billion. Although Eric sighed in his heart about the huge gap between him and these world-class corporate oligarchs, he would not belittle himself. As long as all the companies in the Firefly system fully grew, they would definitely be giants that everyone would need to look up to. Moreover, with the rapid development of advanced technology, this day would not be too far away. In the sharp corner manner, Eric sat on the sofa by the curtain wall and flipped through Fortune magazine. Natasha came in with Amy Pascal and made coffee for the two of them. The twins quietly went upstairs. Today was July 9th, and tomorrow was the official start of the Yahoo annual meeting. Eric was about to fly to Boston. Drew and the twins were upstairs helping him pack. Amy sat down on the sofa opposite him and took a sip of coffee. She glanced at the magazine in Eric's hand and smiled. "Eric, I think you should like Forbes more." Eric knew that Amy was referring to the Forbes rich list. He said, "It's easy to lose your ambition by always looking at those people. You still have to face reality to motivate yourself." Amy shook her head and sighed. "You have already left everyone in the dust. It's hard to imagine where you will go in the future. In short, I don't have the good habit of waiting for others." Eric smiled and asked, "Drew said that you talked to Kevin Costner about the sequel to Mission Impossible yesterday. What was the result?" Future Waterworld, which cost $175 million, was officially released the day before yesterday. The box office on the first day was only $6 million. Although this number was similar to Forrest Gump, the weight of the two movies was very different. What's more, Future Waterworld was also met with bad reviews after its release. It was impossible for the box office to go on a long-term trajectory. Coupled with the fact that there were many blockbusters that were still being released and were about to start filming, its prospects were extremely bleak. After the box office on the first day was released, Kevin Costner's last hope was dashed. He took the initiative to contact Flower Pictures, hoping to launch the sequel to Mission Impossible to maintain his popularity. "It's just a preliminary contact," Amy replied. "I hope to sign the contract for 2 sequels at once." Kevin Costner is only willing to sign 1. Also, they are not willing to make too many concessions in terms of remuneration. Although Law Enforcement and Future Waterworld had failed 2 blockbusters in a row, Mission Impossible had just achieved great success last year. The popularity of the movie was still at its peak. It was not surprising that Kevin Costner was not willing to make too many concessions. But the initiative is always on our side. "Let's talk slowly," Eric said after listening. Amy nodded and said, "I met Joe Silver yesterday. He asked me to ask you if the agreement from last year still stands." Amy's tone was a little doubtful. Obviously, Joe Silver did not explain the matter clearly to her. Eric and Joe Silver met at the celebration party for True Lies last year. Coincidentally, Joe Silver was the producer of The Matrix. Eric had the intention to rope him in to be in charge of this project. Eric roughly explained the situation to Amy and said, "Although Fair Game failed, it is undeniable that Joe Silver is a producer who is very good at producing action movies. I think he is very suitable to be in charge of The Matrix series." Amy shook her head and said, "Eric, I don't think this is a good idea." "Why?" Eric was puzzled. "Do you still remember Peter Guber and John Peters?" Eric nodded. After the 2 of them left Columbia, they faded out of Hollywood. After all, very few people were willing to invite these 2 prodigal sons to be producers. However, with their glorious resume of squandering more than $2 billion of assets in Colombia, it was hard for Hollywood to forget them. Amy continued, "In the beginning, Sony poached Peter Guber and John Peters from Time Warner to be the CEO and president of Columbia. But at that time, the 2 of them still had a contract with Warner. Sony spent $200 million to buy their studio under Warner. But because of the contract, they had to pay Time Warner another $800 million. Only then did they drop the matter. Joe Silver's relationship with Warner is even closer than the 2 of them. His production company is also under Warner, and he has also signed a long-term contract with Warner. In all these years, he has not participated in any production outside of Warner's company. Time Warner is in a very bad situation now. Under such circumstances, if Firefly poached him, they would not let him go easily. When that time comes, Firefly will have to pay the same price as Sony." After listening to Amy, Eric could only shake his head regretfully. If Joe Silver could transfer to Firefly, he did not mind paying Time Warner an appropriate amount of compensation. But Eric would never be a fool like Sony. Speaking of which, although the summer was not over yet, Warner's strategy of using quantity to replace quality to increase sales was doomed to failure in Eric's opinion. 3 of the planned 5 films had already been released. Except for Batman Forever, which had a decent box office, Fair Game, which was released at the end of May, and Future Waterworld, which had just been released, both ended in failure. Although there was still Arnold Schwarzenegger's Evaporation Order and Al Pacino and Robert De Niro's Thief of Fire in the next 2 weeks, from what Eric could remember, these 2 films did not have a high box office. The box office of Evaporation Order was likely to be similar to Fox's Die Hard 3 in May. They were both old-school action films that barely broke the 100 million mark domestically, and slightly better overseas. Although Thief of Fire was a classic, the film's nearly 3-hour duration would greatly limit its box office. Because none of the 5 films had special effects blockbusters that were likely to be a big hit overseas, and Batman's overseas box office appeal was even lower than in North America, the total global box office of the 5 films in the future would only be about $1 billion. This figure was only slightly more than the global box office of Firefly's Jurassic Park 2. With the excellent reputation and the accumulated popularity of the first film, Jurassic Park 2's global box office would not reach the $1 billion of the first film, but it would not be far off. What's more, the production and marketing cost of Jurassic Park 2 was only about $150 million. Just the box office alone was enough to make Firefly a big profit. But the average production cost of the 5 films in Time Warner was close to $100 million, and the total cost of production and distribution was as high as $700 million. A $1 billion global box office was far from enough for Time Warner to recoup such a huge cost. Compared to last year's small loss of $90 million, Time Warner's loss this year would be even greater due to the drag of the film business. Perhaps, it was time to test the possibility of Time Warner's board of directors splitting the business. With the advantage of being the second largest cable TV operator in the US, several of the more famous premium cable TV operators in the future would more or less have a stake in Time Warner. And in this area, it just so happened to be Firefly's shortcoming. "Eric, what are you thinking about?" AI Me's voice suddenly sounded in his ear. Eric collected his thoughts, smiled apologetically, and said, "Nothing, let's talk about MGM." Just a few casual words, but the main purpose of AI Me's visit today was the acquisition of MGM by Flower Pictures. Taking advantage of the time before Eric left Los Angeles, AI Me specially came to discuss this matter with Eric. AI Me nodded, and didn't ask why Eric was distracted just now. She said, "Vivendi, Corkery, and our three forces that want to acquire MGM have offered around $1.5 billion for the time being." After the news that Flower Pictures and DreamWorks Productions may cut off cooperation with MGM spread, the other two parties didn't make another offer. "Vivendi's executives and Corkery have contacted me, and they also hope to meet with you. They know that Flower Pictures doesn't have enough funds, so they all hope to cooperate on this acquisition. Credit Lyonnais offered $1.8 billion, and everyone is in a deadlock for the time being." Eric held the coffee cup and quietly listened to AI Me, and his mind was quickly calculating. Even if the final acquisition price was maintained at $1.5 billion, it wouldn't be easy for Flower Pictures to come up with this money. In Eric's plan, Firefly Group would use $300 million in cash to buy the overseas, videotape, and television distribution rights of Forrest Gump. Flower Pictures released Mission Impossible at the end of last year, and the income would be used to repay the production financing of several previous films. The following Amazing Night at the Museum was used as a bargaining chip to recover the Marvel superhero copyright, and the income brought to Flower Pictures was limited. Not to mention, the income of Amazing Night at the Museum would probably be settled at the end of the year. After calculating, the available funds in Flower Pictures' hands were only the domestic box office revenue brought by Forrest Gump, and the buyout funds from Firefly, which was about $400 million, still a big gap from $1.5 billion. Chapter 732. A cash gap of about $1. $1 billion was not a problem for the cash-rich Firefly. If the Firefly Group made a move, all the problems would naturally be solved. However, Eric did not intend to let Firefly participate in this merger from the beginning. What's more, Eric had long planned to invest all the spare funds of the Firefly Group into high-tech companies such as Yahoo. If they were distracted by this matter, the progress in other aspects would definitely be hindered. After thinking for a while, Eric took out his mobile phone and dialed Emily Brighton's phone number. The Ltd Group's performance in the past 2 years had been very outstanding, and it had a retail network like the Victoria's Secret chain store that could bring in a lot of cash. The cash flow was also very abundant. Eric also saw in Ltd's financial documents that Emily intended to repay the group's long-term debt in advance. In this case, it was also a good idea to let Ltd participate in this merger. Although Eric was a major shareholder of Ltd, the shares were held by Firefly Investment. At least, in terms of equity, MGM and Firefly Group would not have any connection in the future. After the call was connected, Eric said hello and asked straightforwardly, "Emily, are you interested in investing in Hollywood?" Amy Pascal sat quietly on the sofa and listened to Eric and Emily discuss on the phone for more than 10 minutes. When Eric hung up the phone, she roughly knew the result. $600 million, Eric said to Amy after hanging up the phone. Ltd can probably come up with $600 million. Now there is about a $500 million gap. If the box office of Amazing Night at the Museum is good enough, with the copyrights of several films in the hands of Flower Pictures, we have enough chips to solve the remaining funds through debt financing, Amy said, but this cycle will take at least 3 months. Credit Lyonnais has no initiative in the transaction price. They will definitely not make concessions on the acquisition payment period. Eric thought for a while and said, if Vivendi is willing, let them participate. Forget about Korea, this kind of person will only add to the trouble. While they were talking, Drew came downstairs with the twins. The twins were each pulling a suitcase in their hands. After hugging Amy, Drew intimately squeezed next to Eric, held his arm, and asked, "Where are you guys at?" Eric used his arm to clamp down on the girl's restless hands and smiled. "Regarding the financing, I plan to let LTD and Vivendi participate. What do you think?" "Yes, it's up to you." Druid nodded. He had no intention of questioning Eric's decision. Amy said, "Eric, I think Vivendi will not be satisfied with the remaining $500 million share. That's all. If they are not willing, we will contact the investment companies on Wall Street. I think the possibility of them refusing is very low. Whether it is Vivendi or Korea, they know that if they forcibly take MGM from us, Flower Pictures and DreamWorks Animation will withdraw. They will only be left with a mess. So, cooperation is the only way to participate in this merger," Eric said. He thought for a while and said, "After buying MGM, we will definitely integrate DreamWorks Animation. If they are not satisfied, then we can also transfer the 30% of DreamWorks Animation shares that Firefly owns to them." Amy nodded, but Drew asked, "Eric, in this case, won't our control over the company become weaker and weaker?" Flower Pictures and DreamWorks Animation, with their several major copyrights, were worth about $1 billion. MGM's stock price had been low because of its high debt. Most of the time, it was on the verge of bankruptcy. 75% of the shares held by Credit Lyonnais was worth about $1.5 billion at this time. In addition, MGM had 25% of the outstanding shares. The total market value was $2 billion. Eric didn't know how much MGM's total capital was. But simply looking at the market value of the companies, a total of $4 billion could be counted as 40 shares. Flower Pictures was completely in Drew's hands, so it was counted as 10 shares. For this acquisition, Flower Pictures invested $400 million. LTD invested $600 million, so they could buy another 10 shares. Then, after the merger in the future, Eric would still have 50% of the shares of the new company, which was enough to firmly control the new company. After analyzing the data with Drew and Amy, Eric said, "Although there may be a major shareholder like Vivendi, the shares of the new company will still be very scattered in the future. It will be difficult for other small shareholders to affect the company's operations. The shares in our hands are already enough to form absolute control. Even after the merger, the company can increase its shares by about 10% to raise operating funds. This action will not affect the control." These days, Bill Gates often had a feeling of miscalculation, and this feeling was getting stronger and stronger. It was all because of the contract he signed with Yahoo last year. Although Microsoft had gotten the contract to acquire 30% of Yahoo shares in 1999, the beta version of Windows 95 was getting more and more popular. Their main competitor, Apple's sales of their new products were dropping rapidly. Bill Gates gradually realized that Windows 95 might dominate the operating system industry. The more he thought about this, the more he felt he had lost out in that contract. 1 year ago. If he had been more cautious a year ago and had more confidence in the market prospects of Windows 95, perhaps today's events would not have happened. As the release date of Windows 95 was approaching, Microsoft's share prices had been soaring recently. Their market value had more than doubled from last year to over $40 billion. Bill Gates is still confident that Microsoft will not be able to afford Yahoo's 30% shares in 1999. But he felt that this contract will restrict Microsoft's development for the next 4 years, and Microsoft will not be able to make progress. After all, there were still 4 years left. The internet industry is going crazy, and Microsoft can't just sit back and do nothing while holding on to their position as the operating system industry's overlord. But what can Microsoft do? Bill Gates had placed a lot of emphasis on browser software. But last year, Yahoo's browser became the default browser for Windows operating system, and the contract also restricted Microsoft from introducing their own browser software for the next few years. This caused Microsoft to lose control of this important internet industry. Bill Gates had thought of canceling the contract, and he had asked Microsoft's legal department to do a risk assessment. If Microsoft cancels the contract, they will only need to pay around $300 million. This amount was within Microsoft's acceptable range. At most, they would have to fight with Yahoo in court for a few more years. However, from last year to now, even though it wasn't a long time, it was enough time for Yahoo to further consolidate its technical and patent barriers in various online products, including browser software. If Microsoft did not sign that contract a year ago, they would enter the market and develop their own browser. Then, they can use their advantage in operating systems to take over Yahoo's browser market share and promote their own internet standards. But now, Microsoft did not just lose a year of time. Compared to a year ago, Yahoo's browser technology is much better. Yahoo's IES web page scripting language, GIF image format, and even MP3 audio format are all heavily dependent on Yahoo's browser. More than 90% of the websites on the internet are using Yahoo's technology. If Microsoft does not get Yahoo's patent authorization, other software companies' browsers will not be able to decode most of the websites on the internet. Maybe to prevent Microsoft from being accused of monopolizing the internet, Yahoo had given them the authorization for their technologies. Microsoft had already gotten the authorization for some of their browser's patents. But if Microsoft cancels the contract, Yahoo's patent authorization will be invalidated, and Yahoo will not give Microsoft any more authorization. More than 90% of internet companies and users were already used to Yahoo's technical standards. Even if Microsoft dominated the operating system market, it was impossible for them to create another standard. Sitting in the front row of the hall, Bill Gates listened to Yahoo's chief operating officer, Jeff Locke, explain how to use Yahoo's online payment tool, Yahoo Pay. He had mixed feelings again. This auditorium is rented by Yahoo from MIT for the launch of Yahoo's internet products. It will be held on July 10th at 6:15 p.m. In the past 15 minutes, Yahoo CEO, Ian Neer, gave a brief review of Yahoo's development in the past few years. He also promoted several of Yahoo's popular internet products, including Yahoo Browser, Yahoo Mail, Yahoo Instant Messenger, Yahoo Portal, and other major sectors. These were all popular internet applications with more than 10 million users. Bill Gates also realized that behind these products, there was a huge number of technology patent clusters. In North America, where intellectual property protection is very strict, these patents cannot be used as one pleases. Without authorization, even a giant like Microsoft cannot use these patents recklessly. Microsoft can afford to pay for patent abuse, but they cannot bear the consequences of breaking business rules. After all, Microsoft owns a large number of patents for operating systems. If their competitors follow Microsoft's example and break the rules, Microsoft will not be able to survive. Right now, Jeff Locke was introducing Yahoo's online payment tool on stage, which shocked Bill Gates even more. Although he didn't know much about the financial industry, he realized that such a payment platform would be no different from a bank. The financial regulatory system in the US was relatively open. As long as Yahoo was willing, it wouldn't be too difficult to get a banking license. An online bank that completely monopolized the virtual world, one could imagine how terrifying its development potential would be. With this in mind, Bill Gates leaned forward slightly and couldn't help but look at Eric, who was a few seats away. Eric was chatting with the CEO of Cisco, John Chambers, who was sitting next to him. He noticed Bill Gates' gaze and nodded slightly at him. Bill Gates nodded as well. From the corner of his eye, he saw a camera not far away sweeping over. He immediately sat up straight and revealed a professional smile. Bill Gates once again felt that this press conference was a big deal. It was broadcasted on TV. Out of caution, the press conference was not broadcasted live on TV. Instead, it was delayed by 3 hours. After the recording, it was scheduled to be broadcasted at 9 p.m. on ABC. Even so, it meant that tens of millions of viewers would be able to watch the press conference. This would undoubtedly create a strong advertising effect for Yahoo. Windows 95 will be released on August 24th, and Microsoft's marketing department had planned to broadcast the conference live via satellite. hundreds of thousands of people will be able to watch the Windows 95 conference through satellite signals. But compared to Yahoo, Bill Gates felt Microsoft's conference is too stingy. He decided to speak to Eric later and hoped to broadcast the Windows 95 conference on ABC. Of course, Microsoft can afford to pay for this. But without the support of the top management, it will not be easy for Microsoft to get the chance to broadcast the conference on the 3 major TV networks. On the stage, after Jeff Locke finished introducing Yahoo Pay, he paused for a moment amidst the applause of the thousands of guests below the stage. He picked up the mineral water on the podium and took a sip, giving everyone a break to digest the information they had just received. After a while, Jeff Locke picked up the remote control again and pressed the button. A brand new image and 2 eye-catching words appear on the big screen behind him. Yahoo Blog. Okay. Next, I would like to recommend Yahoo's brand new online product, Yahoo's homepage. Jeff Locke had a faint smile on his face. He gestured to the big screen behind him and continued, "The internet is still a very new world for most people. We have achieved the goal of getting tons of information from Yahoo's portal. We can use Yahoo Mail and YCR to communicate with our friends thousands of miles away. We can also discuss trending topics on Yahoo's forum." Then, going one step further, many people might have a thought. Is there a kind of online tool that can let us show off to everyone? Then, today, your dream will come true. Chapter 733. Before this, although various personal websites have appeared on the internet, these all require sufficient professional computer technology foundation to be able to realize. Yahoo's personal homepage service will break this limitation. It doesn't matter if you are a student, chef, artist, singer, model, plumber, or housewife. You can set up a personal homepage on Yahoo and showcase yourself to your heart's content. As Jeff Locke spoke, he pressed a button on the remote control in his hand. The screen behind him showed users from all walks of life. These people were all invited to participate in the beta test of Yahoo's personal homepage. Many of them were celebrities from the political, business, Hollywood, technology, and other circles. After explaining the general concept of the personal homepage, Jeff Locke switched to the big screen and continued, "Yahoo's personal homepage connects users from all over the United States and even the world through 2 major categories, interests and regions. Not only can you show yourself to everyone on this network, but it also allows us to find like-minded friends from all over the world through a personal computer without having to travel far or participate in frequent social activities." Bill Gates woke up from his deep thoughts when he heard the thunderous applause in the auditorium. He looked at Jeff Locke, who was nodding to everyone on the stage. He had made up his mind. Although Microsoft had missed their last chance to enter the internet browser market, they can still develop their web portal business. These days, Microsoft had tested most of Yahoo's top management. Bill Gates also knows other technology companies that want to enter the internet industry are doing the same. Among the 4 top management of Yahoo, the CEO, Ian Neer, is in charge of Yahoo's development strategy. Jeff Locke is in charge of Yahoo's web portal and related software operations. Steve Mitnick is in charge of Yahoo's research and development. Tina Brown, the last person to join Yahoo, is in charge of Yahoo's information department. Since Fong Yu had decided to develop his web portal business, he had to poach Jeff Locke, who was familiar with the rules of web portals, to Microsoft. This would be more efficient. Bill Gates also noticed that among the top management, Jeff Locke is the one who is most resistant to Microsoft's poaching. According to the information he received, this is because Jeff Locke is unhappy with the shares he will get. After the conference ended, the guests walked out of the auditorium. Yahoo will be hosting a banquet at a nearby hotel. Bill Gates waved to his assistant, who was sitting nearby, and asked him to make an appointment with Jeff Locke. After that, he walked over to Eric and the rest with a smile. Yahoo's online product launch attracted a strong response in the form of TV broadcast. The Technical Alliance and Advertising Alliance conferences held in Boston over the next 2 days also attracted more attention from the media. While attending related events, Eric's other time was also occupied by a lot of work. As Yahoo grew larger, its original office became more and more shabby. Moreover, for the sake of confidentiality, it was not suitable for Yahoo to continue staying in its original office. Yahoo's top management and Eric hope that Yahoo can build its own corporate campus, but this cannot be done overnight. After some consideration, Eric finally decided on a 30-story office building on Massachusetts Avenue. The building was newly built and has not been sold or rented yet. So, Eric decided to rent the entire building and use it as Yahoo's headquarters. They will move out after a few years when Yahoo's corporate campus is built. In addition, although Yahoo had temporarily cancelled the listing plan, Steve Case hoped that AOL could start the listing plan. Yoma Alala also hopes that Nokia's shares can be listed on the New York Stock Exchange. Other than raising funds, this will help Nokia enter the US market. Eric had to take time out to discuss these issues with them. In addition to these, Eric also had a meeting with several senior executives of Yahoo about the results of the equity reward plan. Although some people had shown signs of leaving Yahoo, Eric still hoped to retain them as much as possible. During this process, the one that caught Eric off guard the most was Jeff Locke. In the preliminary equity reward plan, the four main executives, Ian Neer and Steve Mitnick, will each receive 3 million shares of Yahoo shares. Jeff Locke will receive 2 million shares, and Tina Brown will receive 1 million shares. As the manager of the three companies before the merger, Jeff Locke's equity reward is 1 million shares less than Ian Neer and Steve Mitnick. It is not surprising that he is dissatisfied. However, Eric did not think that this plan is unfair. Ian Neer controls the development of Yahoo and is personally responsible for the establishment of Yahoo's Technology Alliance and Yahoo's Advertising Alliance. Many of Yahoo's current advertising partners and clients were personally negotiated by Ian Neer. In addition, Steve Mitnick is the CTO, responsible for the research and development of all of Yahoo's products. He is also a genius in technology. The results of these two people's work are undoubtedly better than Jeff Locke, who is only responsible for the operation of Yahoo's portal. After all, the current Yahoo is different from Feng Yu's previous life. It is not just a portal. It has instant messaging software, browser, and many other services. Although the portal is undoubtedly the most prominent department of Yahoo, Jeff Locke has fallen behind Ian Neer and Steve Mitnick in terms of importance to Yahoo. 5 days passed quickly, and it is already July 14th. Yahoo's annual meeting officially ended in the afternoon, and most of the guests have left Boston. Eric had planned to leave in the afternoon, but he had to postpone it until tomorrow morning because of some unfinished business. It is already 7:30 p.m., and Eric and Chris left Yahoo's headquarters. They walked side by side on Massachusetts Avenue, and there are a few people following behind them. They are their assistants and bodyguards. So, he has decided to go to Microsoft? Chris kicked a pebble to the side of the road and asked Eric. Eric nodded. Although he had raised the price to 2 million shares in the end, he still couldn't convince Jeff Locke to stay. Locke insisted on 3 million shares, which is equivalent to Ian Neer and Steve Mitnick, before he agrees to stay. Eric is not willing to pay him that much. Eric smiled and said, "Actually, this is also good. Microsoft has a direction to work towards, and Bill Gates will not create trouble for us." Although Microsoft has formed a strong technology and patent barrier, Eric is still wary of Microsoft. After all, many of Yahoo's software will run on Microsoft's operating system in the future. If Microsoft is forced into a corner, Yahoo will be in big trouble. Although the possibility of this happening is not high, it still exists. In Feng Yu's previous life, after Microsoft dominated the operating system industry, they have always been ruthless to their competitors. Chris can understand Eric's concerns. He nodded and said, "Now that everything is done, what do you think of the effect?" He had made such a big commotion in Boston in the past few days in order to lead other competitors astray. Although Eric had explained it to him, Chris was still not sure if it would work. "Didn't you see it?" Eric looked relaxed and said, "Since Microsoft chose to poach Jeff Locke, he will not be a threat to us in the next 2 years." Based on Feng Yu's previous life, Yahoo and Google are two completely different internet companies. Yahoo is more of a media company than a technology company. Google, which focuses on search engines, is a real technology company. In the real world, there are all kinds of barriers to entry for a media company. But in the internet world, the barriers are very low. In the future, individuals can even operate an internet media company. In this situation where the barriers to entry are very low, websites based on media information will become more and more common in the future. It is almost impossible to become an internet giant just by relying on content. A search engine like Google, which focuses on the integration of huge amounts of information on the internet, will be the mainstream of internet companies in the future. In Lu Zhou's previous life, the main reason why Yahoo couldn't escape its fate of decline was that it couldn't make a decision on its own media and technology attributes. In the end, even though it lasted more than a decade longer than AOL, it still couldn't escape its fate. Eric's series of actions in the past few days was to guide other competitors to focus on the development of the internet media business, which is portals. Eric even deliberately spouted nonsense at an industry exchange meeting 2 days ago. He made an image analogy between the portal and the 3 major television networks in reality, describing the relationship between the portal and its advertising alliance partners as a cooperative relationship between a television network and a participating television station. He also wantonly promoted its development prospects, predicting that as long as the number of internet users reached half of the number of TV users in reality, then the revenue scale of the portal would surpass that of the television network in reality. Judging from the reaction at the conference, many people obviously believed him. After the conference, Steve Cass even communicated with Eric, hoping to increase AOL's investment in the portal business. Although Eric convinced Steve Cass that AOL will focus on the role of an internet service provider, Eric did not ask AOL to give up the portal business. This business will play a huge role in boosting AOL's stock price during the dot-com bubble a few years later. Eric did not attack Steve Cass at that time. He readily agreed to the other party's request and was willing to provide some technical support. When many people focused on the portal that was destined to decline, in fact, most people probably did not know that what Eric cared about most was the seemingly inconspicuous Yahoo search tool at the top of the Yahoo portal. In the past few years, he had been intentionally or unintentionally inviting Steve Mitnick, who was in charge of technology research and development, to increase the development of intelligent search engine technology. The two chatted and soon walked to the hotel where they were staying. Chris looked up at the brightly lit restaurant on the second floor and said to Eric, "Jeff Bezos should already be upstairs. He was very unhappy when you suddenly stood him up 2 days ago. It took me a lot of effort to negotiate the terms with him." Eric originally planned to meet with Jeff Bezos the night before to discuss increasing investment in Amazon. However, he was delayed by other things at that time. He originally planned to return to the hotel at 8 o'clock, but in fact, it was delayed until 8:30. The meeting between the two naturally fell through. Eric could only entrust Chris to contact Jeff Bezos. Fortunately, the result was good. According to the agreement reached between Chris and Jeff Bezos, in the next few years, Firefly Investments would be directly responsible for financing Amazon's e-commerce website. Firefly promised not to participate in Amazon's operations. In order to show its sincerity, Firefly Investments would inject funds into Amazon in exchange for convertible preferred shares of Amazon. The so-called preferred shares were shares that did not have voting rights but had the priority to receive dividends. The convertible preferred shares of Amazon held by Firefly Investments would automatically be converted into ordinary shares with voting rights after Amazon's IPO. This agreement could prompt Jeff Bezos to delay Amazon's IPO as much as possible. Firefly Investments could also obtain more shares of Amazon in the process. Chris estimated that before Jeff Bezos decided to list Amazon, Firefly Investments would probably be able to obtain about 40% of Amazon's shares. After the listing, Firefly Investments could maintain a shareholding of more than 30%. The two walked into the hotel and went to the restaurant on the second floor. Although Eric was not late this time, Jeff Bezos was already waiting there. The reason why Eric delayed his departure until the next morning was to take the opportunity to meet Jeff Bezos. Since the agreement had been reached, the two sides did not talk too much about the cooperation. The atmosphere was quite pleasant. After chatting casually for about an hour and getting to know each other, the two sides went their separate ways. Before walking into his hotel room, Eric said to Kelly, "Let's go to New York tomorrow morning before returning to Los Angeles. I have to see the two little guys. Besides, there's also the production progress of America's Top Model, and Project Runway. Chapter 734. On a yacht on the Hudson River in New York, the crew of America's Top Model was filming the latest episode. Eric stood outside the set, wearing a pair of sunglasses. Beside him was Linda Evangelista. In front of them, Cindy Crawford was introducing the rules of the competition to the remaining 6 contestants. After finishing his business in Boston, Eric arrived in New York 3 days ago. He spent the weekend with his wife and children in Long Island, then came to Manhattan. After a month and a half, the filming of America's Top Model and Project Runway were halfway done. They were expected to be completed by September. Eric spent the day yesterday checking the production results of the 2 reality shows. With the memories of her previous life as a reference, Cindy had several years of experience as a TV host. She also had enough experience in TV production. Therefore, Eric was very satisfied with the first 2 episodes of America's Top Model that had been edited. On the other hand, Project Runway wasn't very satisfactory. Although Linda worked very hard, she didn't have as much experience as Cindy. America's Top Model had already edited 2 episodes, but Project Runway only had 1 half-finished episode, which was very unsatisfactory. Since Project Runway followed the trend of America's Top Model in his previous life, Eric brought Linda along to learn from her experience. It was clear that the 2 girls hadn't had much interaction during Eric's absence. Eric was also clear that it was impossible for 2 equally proud and beautiful women to work together. I can't be like Cindy. Linda looked at Cindy Crawford on the set. She moved closer to Eric and said, "The audience will be very interested in the details of the model's training, photography, and even life. But for a fashion designer, that's a lot less interesting. It's unlikely that Cindy's clips can be used as a reference." Eric smiled and said, "I didn't ask you to copy Cindy's ideas. I just asked you to come and see how she uses the material to capture the audience's attention. I'm sure Project Runway has its own points of interest to explore as well." Linda asked curiously, "What is that?" Eric did not expect her to understand. He looked at Sinclair, who was walking over after explaining the rules of the competition, and said, "I've thought about it. We can work on the rhythm of the competition. Since the audience feels that fashion designers are too far away from their lives, we can bring them closer." Cindy walked out of the set and grabbed a bottle of water from one of the staff members. She took a sip and heard Eric's words, so she asked, "Eric, how do you plan on closing the gap between you and the audience?" Eric smiled. "Take a guess." Cindy shrugged, not intending to guess. Linda complained to Eric, "Eric, Cindy is too despicable. When I was filming last week, I only encountered some small problems, so I called her to ask about it. In the end, she didn't have the slightest intention to help. She even laughed at me. Also, she wasn't willing to cooperate with my idea of making a crossover set." Cindy immediately retorted, "Hey, Linda, I have my own job too. Also, I'm not your biological mother. I don't have the obligation to help you." "Okay, stop arguing." Eric waved his hand to be the peacemaker and said, "The crossover set is a good idea, but there's no need to use it so quickly. Wait until the 2nd or 3rd season. At that time we can use it as a gimmick. If we put all the good ideas into the show at once, although it will produce good results, without gradual improvement, the audience will lose interest after a few seasons." Cindy nodded and snorted proudly. She glanced at Linda and said, "Well, Humph, I just don't know if there will be a 2nd or 3rd season of Project Runway." Linda grabbed Eric's arm and said, "If Eric says there will be a 2nd or 3rd season, then there will definitely be one. Do you have a problem with that?" "I have no problem with that." A sly smile appeared on Cindy's face. She didn't believe that Eric would continue to produce Project Runway if the ratings weren't satisfactory. Linda seemed to have realized this as well. She shook Eric's arm and said, "Eric, what's the method you mentioned to close the distance between you and the audience?" Eric recalled the sample film of Project Runway that he had watched yesterday and said, "From the sample film yesterday, it still feels a little slow. This is mainly because the process of making the costumes is very boring. However, we can't cut any more scenes. Otherwise, the entire competition process will be incomplete. Therefore, I think we can add a lot of narration. On one hand, this method can give the audience the feeling of speeding up the pace. On the other hand, it can also provide more explanations for the audience so that they can understand the reasons for the contestants' actions. Well, that's it. Tomorrow, you can have a meeting with the production team to discuss it. I'll be there too. Okay. Linda nodded and looked at Cindy in a threatening manner. Cindy pursed her lips and looked at the contestants who were taking photos. She asked, "Eric, what about my show?" "Well, your show is perfect. Just follow this progress and you don't need to make any changes." Cindy was stunned. She did not feel too excited by Eric's praise. Instead, she felt a little lost. Linda laughed foolishly and made a face at Cindy when Eric was not paying attention. Cindy had done her job too well, so she had lost a lot of opportunities to spend time with Eric. She was originally a little nervous because she did not do a good enough job, but now she felt proud. Eric withdrew his gaze from the set and noticed the two girls interacting with each other with strange expressions. He asked, "What's wrong with the two of you?" Linda immediately shook her head and said, "Nothing, Eric. Why don't we go back now? I don't think there's any need to waste time here. Maybe we can try the method you just mentioned in the afternoon." UB*TCH. Cindy cursed in her heart. When she saw that Eric really wanted to leave, she pulled on Eric's sleeve and said, "Eric, it's almost noon. I've done such a good job, I can't not get a reward for lunch, right? Eric, let me tell you a secret." Cindy's expression is, she's pinching me again. "Do you think I won't dare to fight back?" Eric separated the two girls and said, "Okay, stop it. There are so many people here." When the two girls noticed that the crew and the contestants who were taking photos on the set were looking at them curiously, they immediately became cold and aloof again. Cindy combed her thick wavy hair and said to Eric, "Eric, let's eat together later. I have a guest, and she's also a beauty. She's going to be a special guest for this episode. You already have a date with someone, and—" Before Linda could finish her sentence, she felt Cindy's threatening gaze and had to give up. Eric put his arm around Linda's waist and patted her gently to stop her from making a scene. He nodded and said to Cindy, "Okay, but you have to tell me who you have a date with first." "Elizabeth Hurley." Cindy said a name. When she saw that Eric's expression did not change, she asked, "Eric, you don't know her?" "I know her." Eric nodded. Elizabeth Hurley was a famous British supermodel and an actress. However, in Eric's memory, he was most familiar with her because of the series of scandals. He did not even know what was going on with Elizabeth Hurley's love life. From the information in his mind, Eric felt that this British supermodel was dating many men at the same time. Moreover, this British supermodel's personality was very similar to a Hong Kong actress. She was always trying her best to hook up with a rich man. The difference was that Elizabeth Hurley was more lucky. In the end, she really hooked up with an Indian tycoon, but the Hong Kong actress was different. Eric remembered that Elizabeth Hurley should be the girlfriend of the British actor Hugh Grant now. After Hugh Grant became famous with 4 Weddings and a Funeral, she also used her boyfriend's fame to develop well in Hollywood. It seemed that according to the trajectory of history, Hugh Grant would be exposed to a scandal this year and his fame would plummet. However, Eric did not remember the specific date. It was already July this year, and this incident had not happened yet. It seemed that it was the result of the butterfly effect. Eric's influence in Hollywood had changed too many things. Thinking of this, Eric asked Cindy, "I'm just curious. Why did you invite her to be a guest?" Cindy explained, "I met her at a Chanel party last month, and we had a good chat. She heard that I was doing this show now, so she wanted to come over and be a guest judge for an episode. She wanted to enter Hollywood in the past 2 years, but it was not very smooth. So, she wanted to use this opportunity to increase her exposure. It was a win-win situation for everyone. There was no lack of all kinds of parties in this circle. After being reborn for so many years, although Eric had not integrated into this kind of culture, he was used to it. They stayed on the set of America's Top Model for more than an hour. When the crew finished at noon, Cindy hurried Eric and Linda to a relatively quiet restaurant located in a building on 6th Avenue in Manhattan. The privacy was very good. There was a separate cubicle and a membership card was required. The three of them had just sat down when a tall woman in a black dress walked over. "Hi, Liz." Cindy stood up and greeted her. She hugged Elizabeth Hurley and said apologetically, "I'm sorry, Liz. Two friends came over at the last minute. I didn't have time to talk to you, so I brought them with me." As the two women talked, Eric felt Elizabeth Hurley's eyes on his face. They were even shining inexplicably. "Let me introduce you. This is Eric Williams. Oh, this is Linda. You must know her." Cindy deliberately waved her hand in front of Linda's face, which made Linda feel depressed. "Mr. Williams, nice to meet you." Elizabeth Hurley did not hide her eyes. With a decent smile on her face, she reached out her hand to Eric. "Just call me Eric." Eric shook hands with her. It was just a simple touch, but he felt her fingers gently tickle his palm. He thought to himself, this woman is really bold. After greeting, they sat down at the table. Elizabeth Hurley asked without hiding anything, "Eric, are you here for America's Top Model?" "Yeah." Eric nodded, took the menu from the waiter, and flipped through it casually. Elizabeth Hurley also realized that she was a little anxious. She elegantly flipped through the menu in her hand, ordered the dishes, and waited for the waiter to leave before continuing, "I thought you should be in Boston now, Eric. I heard that it's very lively there in recent days. By the way, I also opened a personal homepage on Yahoo, but I don't know how to use it." Eric said perfunctorily, "Oh, this should be very simple. Just think about it a little and you will understand." After Yahoo publicly released its personal homepage at the new product launch, the number of users had exceeded 7 million in less than a week, and it was still increasing rapidly. With Eric's influence in Hollywood, many stars also took the opportunity to open their personal homepages. This move increased the attractiveness of Yahoo's personal homepage. Because the mobile internet era was still far away, Yahoo's personal homepage was mainly a long-form blog. It was far from time for Weibo, which focused on real-time communication. However, Eric had specifically instructed the relevant departments of Yahoo's personal homepage to pay more attention to the social functions of the personal homepage. When this topic was brought up, Cindy's eyes lit up. She thought of a photo she saw in the New York Times a few days ago. It was a photo of Eric with Jeffrey Katzenberg of Firefly Group, Yoma Alala of Nokia, John Chambers of Cisco, Steve Case of AOL, and a large number of other corporate moguls. All the people in the photo were centered around Eric. In the article accompanying the photo, the reporter from the New York Times predicted that with the rapid development of these companies, Eric's personal wealth will increase by more than 50% this year. At the beginning of this year, Forbes magazine had estimated Eric's personal wealth to be $46.5 billion. After an increase of 50%, Eric's personal wealth will increase to $70 billion next year. How much is $70 billion? Microsoft's share prices had skyrocketed, and Bill Gates, who is ranked second on the Forbes rich list, had become one of the world's richest men. Bill Gates's wealth had reached $12.9 billion this year. Eric's personal wealth is equivalent to the total wealth of the top 10 Forbes billionaires combined. Chapter 735. Due to the casual conversation just now, the women were smart enough not to show any abnormalities in front of Eric, even though they had different thoughts. Cindy took the initiative to start another topic and said to Elizabeth Hurley, "Liz, haven't you been looking for a collaboration with Estee Lauder recently? How did it go?" Elizabeth Hurley shook her head regretfully. Estee Lauder intends to continue renewing the contract with Polina Pliskova. I don't have a chance. After saying that, Elizabeth Hurley glanced at Eric as if she was implying something. Polina still has a contract with Estee Lauder. I'm not aware of this. Eric said casually. Paulina Pliskova was one of the Victoria's Secret angels last year. She was a supermodel from the Czech Republic. Eric had always felt that this supermodel looked somewhat similar to Audrey Hepburn. From Elizabeth Hurley's reaction, it was likely that Estée Lauder's contract with Paulina Pliskova had expired this year. Estée Lauder had originally planned to change her spokesperson, but Paulina Pliskova's popularity from last year's Victoria's Secret fashion show made Estée Lauder dismiss the idea. Whether it was a high-end, mid-range, or a fast-disappearing brand, the most important factor in choosing a spokesperson was the other party's popularity. The group of models who participated in last year's Victoria's Secret fashion show were undoubtedly the most popular in the industry. Linda joked, "I also have a lot of endorsements." "Eric, do you want to know?" "Oh." Eric shrugged. "I'm not interested, but I'm sure that you have an endorsement from Victoria's Secret." Linda smiled and said, "Is there a need to be sure? You were the one who decided it." When Elizabeth Hurley heard the two talking about Victoria's Secret, she timely interrupted, "Eric, will you still participate in the production of this year's Victoria's Secret fashion show?" "I won't participate this time," Eric said and looked at Cindy and Linda. "Will you be relieved after hearing this news?" Linda nodded straightforwardly. She even cooperated and showed a relieved expression. She said, "Yes, yes, you tyrant. Finally, you can't torture us anymore." Actually, since the beginning of the year, LTD had been preparing for this year's Victoria's Secret fashion show. Eric had let go of this project, so other than the supermodels, they had to settle the background music for this year's Victoria's Secret fashion show. With the huge popularity accumulated last year, many famous musicians were interested in collaborating with the Victoria's Secret show. Linda and Cindy had long known that the Victoria's Secret fashion show had a new director this year. It was the MTV director who had filmed the Victoria's Secret commercial for them. However, the director was still in Los Angeles working on his first film. He would only be able to come to New York next month to take over this year's Victoria's Secret fashion show. As one of Britain's top supermodels, Elizabeth Hurley also had the opportunity to participate in the Victoria's Secret show last year. However, she was participating in a British film at that time. Moreover, she was 1 year older than Cindy. At that time, her thoughts were similar to Cindy's. She felt that she had reached the upper limit of the modeling industry, so she began to develop in the direction of acting. When the Victoria's Secret fashion show set off a worldwide trend, the film she acted in did not even make a splash. She regretted it. The guest judges who participated in this year's America's Top Model had the intention of befriending Cindy, hoping that she could help them get on the Victoria's Secret stage this year. What surprised her was that she met Eric, the young Hollywood mogul, at lunch this time. She knew very well that if she wanted to get on the Victoria's Secret stage, even if she became Cindy's best friend, it would not be as effective as a few casual words from this young man in front of her. As they chatted, the waiter quickly served lunch and poured red wine for everyone. Only then did the waiter leave quietly. Elizabeth Hurley slowly cut the steak on her plate and said to Eric casually, "Speaking of which, I missed the Victoria's Secret fashion show last year because of my schedule. I still have some regrets. Eric, do you think I have a chance to participate in this year's Victoria's Secret fashion show?" The Victoria's Secret Angel Corps had basically taken shape and even formed several different tiers. The group of 5 naturally occupied the top of the pyramid. Behind them were a group of slightly inferior but equally popular first-tier supermodels. In the end, there was still the largest group left, which was the potential army waiting to rise to the top at any time. Although the second Victoria's Secret fashion show had not officially started production, all the angel candidates had been confirmed. In addition, Elizabeth Hurley's fame was in the second tier, not a nobody in the third tier. If she was added at this time, it would definitely affect the production and marketing strategy that Victoria's Secret had basically confirmed. Eric was just about to say a few perfunctory words when he felt a leg under the table reach out and rub against his leg in a very teasing manner. Eric looked up at Cindy in front of him. Linda sat next to him, Cindy sat opposite him, and Elizabeth Hurley sat diagonally across from him. Cindy's face did not show any abnormality. When she saw Eric looking over, she smiled charmingly. Eric turned to Cindy's left and happened to see Elizabeth Hurley gently winking at him. If she stretched her leg diagonally, it would be very easy for her to touch the other two. Eric even had the absurd idea of lifting the table to see what was under it. He had just seen the other party's boldness and was no longer surprised. Following his previous train of thought, he said, "I'm afraid that won't work, Liz. The list of Victoria's Secret fashion show has been confirmed. Eric, as long as you say the word, they will definitely be willing to change, right?" Elizabeth Hurley saw that Eric was unmoved and pestered him a little. She did not think that there was any need to be reserved in front of a big shot like Eric. Even the slightest hint from him would be a very precious opportunity for her. Eric smiled and nodded. "Of course, that's why I can't do that. It would be a mess. Haven't you started to develop into an actress? I think you can spend more effort in this area." Eric said this to change the topic, but looking at the slightly wild and beautiful face diagonally across from him, he suddenly thought of the movie Ace of Spies. Although Elizabeth Hurley was just a vase in the movie, it should be the only work that she could bring to the table. In his memory, Ace of Spies was a similar parody movie to Condor Anti a few years ago. Condor Anti parodied a lot of movies, while Ace of Spies focused on the 007 series. Although many of the jokes were only understood by Americans, and there was not much commercial potential overseas, with its relatively low production cost, the production company made a lot of money. Mike Myers, the scriptwriter and lead actor of Trump Card Spy, was not a nobody. A few years ago, he produced another spoof comedy series, Fighting With Stars Against, and it achieved a higher box office than Fighting Condors Against. However, similar themes could not escape the cycle of weak sequels. Because the first box office was a big success, Fighting With Stars Against 2 went too far and spent $60 million to produce it. In the end, it was a flop, and Mike Myers had been silent for the past 2 years. In the original spacetime, Ace of Spies had been made 3 times. It was a rare trilogy of parody comedies of the same genre. The box office must have been very good. Maybe he could find time to ask someone to investigate whether Mike Myers had made the script. Elizabeth Hurley saw that Eric took the initiative to lead the topic to the movie, and she took the opportunity to say, "Eric, I also like to be an actress, but I haven't found the right opportunity. Firefly, do you have any movies that are suitable for me to act in?" Before Eric could answer, Linda suddenly said, "Eric, I also want to act in a movie." Eric did not know how to answer Elizabeth Hurley's pestering. When he saw Linda interrupting at the right time, he almost wanted to hold her face and kiss her. However, on the surface, he showed an impatient look and said, "You should finish Project Runway first. If you don't do it well, I'll send you back to Canada." Linda curled her lips, and there was no flaw in her expression. She said, "Why are you so angry? If you don't want to act, then don't." At this time, Cindy also said, "Eric, your next movie hasn't been settled yet. Are you really going to stop acting?" "I just haven't found a suitable project," Eric said casually. Linda asked, "Then what kind of project would make you interested?" "Why do I feel like these questions are so familiar?" Eric complained. He thought for a while and said, "Maybe it can at least surpass the box office of Jurassic Park." Surpassing Jurassic Park? It's not that easy. Everyone said that the box office of Jurassic Park was more like an accident. Eric laughed and said, "Every movie's box office is an accident, because no one can accurately predict the box office before the movie is released." Linda said, "I think you shouldn't set the bar so high. I liked the first few movies you filmed, Sleepless in Seattle, Pretty Woman, and Dark War. I liked that movie the most. I even wanted to play the role of Yo-Yo. Later, Tornado and Jurassic Park were very exciting, but the plot was much worse. With the two women echoing each other, their cooperation was flawless. Without leaving a trace, they squeezed Elizabeth Hurley out of the center of the topic, not giving her any chance to continue the conversation. After the meal, they left the restaurant and walked into the elevator together. Elizabeth Hurley looked at Cindy and Linda, who were leaning on each side of Eric. How could she not understand the relationship between the 3 of them? However, she didn't have any disdain in her heart. Instead, she was a little jealous. If she could join them, perhaps she wouldn't be able to resist. After all, this little man's power and wealth made her unable to produce any resistance. When they arrived at the underground parking lot, Cindy reluctantly said goodbye to Eric and Linda. She then drove away. Elizabeth Hurley walked up and leaned on the seat next to Eric. She said, "Eric, are you going to the set of Project Runway in the afternoon?" "Yes." Eric nodded. "Can I go and take a look?" Elizabeth Hurley asked. Then she added, "I've watched Survivor. I've always been curious about how these reality shows are made. Liz, I'm afraid that's not very convenient. This kind of show needs to be kept confidential. I'm just going to take a look. I promise I won't say anything." "Really?" Elizabeth Hurley said. She then took a step forward and gently held Eric's arm. Eric could only look at Linda. Linda gave him a look that said, "You decide." She then turned to the side. These little bitches were crying and shouting as they pounced on them. She did not think she could be a shield, which had no future. Moreover, she did not think she was in a position to do so. She was not even Eric's girlfriend. Okay then. Eric saw that Linda did not respond. He also felt Elizabeth Hurley's body gently rubbing against his arm. He took the opportunity to agree. Few people would be able to resist the pursuit of such a beautiful woman. The three of them walked to Eric's luxury car. The driver opened the door. Eric extended his hand to let the two women in. He then drove to the set of Project Runway. Although Eric took Linda to the set of America's Top Model in the morning, the filming of Project Runway did not stop. When they arrived at the set of Project Runway a few blocks away, the crew had already started work. The progress here was slower than that of America's Top Model. Moreover, because of the different format of the show, the filming location of Project Runway was relatively fixed. There were only the sewing room, the contestants' dormitory, and the competition venue in the studio. Although the contestants' competition time seemed to be very tight after the series was completed, in reality, each episode took up to a week to film. After Linda arrived, she only informed the production team to discuss the editing of the show the next morning. After that, she did not disturb the crew. She obediently watched the show with Eric and Elizabeth Hurley. Of course, Elizabeth Hurley's mind was not on the reality show. She basically clung to Eric the whole time, pretending to be curious and asking questions. She looked like she was eager to learn. Eric dealt with this pestering beauty. He took the time to call Kelly, who had already rushed back to Los Angeles. He asked her to check Mike Myers' information and see if he had the script for Trump Card. Chapter 736. The shooting of Project Runway went on until the evening. Several contestants finished the theme of the competition, which was casual swimwear. At this time, the models had already put on the contestants' works. Although it was time to get off work, today's work was not over yet, because the designers who participated in the competition would take their models and works to a fashion party in the evening. They would show their works to a famous fashion columnist of a daily newspaper under the Hearst Group, who would also be a guest judge of the theme. Elizabeth Hurley stayed with Eric all afternoon, watching the crew pack up their equipment and prepare to move. She said, "Eric, I can feel that you are not satisfied with their work, but why don't you give them some advice?" Eric could feel that his appearance had already made many of the crew members tremble in fear. If he wantonly interfered in the production, these people would definitely be at a loss. This was the main reason why he had remained a bystander the entire afternoon. Furthermore, most of the details were within his tolerance range. Even if he needed to make adjustments, he could discuss it with Linda in private. Hearing Elizabeth Hurley's question, Eric casually explained, "No one can do something perfectly. It's inevitable that there will be some mistakes." Linda Evangelista came over with the director and said, "Eric, the crew is going to the park in New York. I will also attend the party in the evening. Do you want to come with me?" Eric was not interested in parties, not to mention this kind of small party that was specially organized for the filming of the show. He shook his head and said, "Forget it. I plan to go back and rest early." Then he looked at Elizabeth Hurley beside him and said, "Liz, you must be interested in these things. Go and play with Linda tonight." Elizabeth Hurley sensed the opportunity and held Eric's arm intimately. "Eric, in fact, I don't like to attend parties. They are too noisy." Linda looked at Elizabeth Hurley, who seemed to be very familiar with her. She curled her lips and said something to the director. Then she said to Eric, "It's okay if you don't want to go. The shooting starts at 8 o'clock. Let's go have dinner first." After finding a nearby restaurant and having dinner, Linda looked at Elizabeth Hurley, who had no intention of leaving Eric's side. She grumbled inwardly to Cindy before reluctantly rushing to work. It was already past 7:30 in the evening, and the lights of the bustling Manhattan were just starting to turn on. Eric personally sent Linda to the shooting location of tonight's party. He kissed the girl goodbye and returned to the car. Looking at Elizabeth Hurley, who was leaning lazily on the leather seat, he said with an indifferent smile, "Liz, where do you live? Shall I send you back?" Seeing that Linda had left, Elizabeth Hurley ignored the driver in the front seat and boldly approached Eric. The perfect perfume smell instantly surrounded him. "Eric, can't I go to your place for a cup of coffee? Let's go to the apartment on 6th Avenue. Eric said to the driver in the front seat. He raised the partition of the driver's seat and pushed the woman who was leaning on him away. Looking at the flawless face and curvy body, Eric narrowed his eyes and said with a naughty smile, "Liz, let me warn you in advance. I'm very violent." Elizabeth Hurley felt as if tens of thousands of ants were crawling all over her body under Eric's undisguised gaze. She shivered slightly and was a little hesitant. Suddenly, she thought of Linda and Cindy and realized that Eric should be joking. After all, if Eric was really what he said, Cindy and Linda would never be so close to him. The more she thought about it, the more relieved she felt. The misgivings in her heart quickly dissipated. Elizabeth Hurley licked the corner of her lips in a wild manner and said with a hint of retaliation, "Eric, I'm also very violent." "Oh, then I'm looking forward to it," Eric said with a smile with surprise flashing across his face. The two came together to Eric's mansion on 6th Avenue near the exit of Central Park. Elizabeth Hurley was also shocked by the duplex mansion that occupied the top 2 floors of the building and had a rooftop garden. She often mingled in the upper-class circle, so she knew the value of this mansion very well. However, when she thought of Eric's wealth, she quickly felt relieved. Looking out through the glass curtain wall, it was already 8 o'clock in the evening. The entire Manhattan was brightly lit. Because it was midsummer, the day was very long, and the sky in the distance was still glowing white. Elizabeth Hurley stepped on the cool floor barefoot and leisurely walked around the living room. Eric didn't have the same interest as her. He sat down on the sofa and picked up an apple from the fruit plate on the coffee table in front of him. He picked up the fruit knife next to him and casually peeled the apple. He said to the girls floating around, "Make yourself what you want to drink." Elizabeth Hurley responded and walked to the wine cabinet in the corner. She opened it and took out a bottle of red wine. It was 1972 Romani Conti. She raised her eyebrows slightly and turned her head to look at the man sitting on the sofa. Her expression changed slightly, and then she laughed self-deprecatingly at her thoughts just now. To be honest, she almost wanted to quietly take this bottle of wine away. It would be worth at least tens of thousands of dollars if she were to resell it. Elizabeth Hurley picked up the bottle of red wine and waved it at Eric. She said, "Eric, is this okay?" This New York apartment was completely decorated for Eric by Drew. The little girl had introduced the collection of red wine in the wine cabinet to him in a serious manner. Some of the bottles were even bought at a high price at an auction. However, he didn't live here for long, and he wasn't too interested in red wine. Drew had forgotten most of what she had said. When he heard Elizabeth Hurley's words, he casually glanced at it and nodded. "Open it if you like it." When Elizabeth Hurley heard that, she looked around and found a bottle opener. After a while, as the cork made a soft sound, she licked the corner of her lips in a pathetic manner. She couldn't help but calculate how much she would drink in one gulp. $2,000, or $3,000. She found a wine glass and poured 2 glasses. However, Elizabeth Hurley didn't rush to Eric. She walked to the side of the record player and carefully selected a jazz album. She put it in the record player and turned it on. Soft jazz music immediately sounded in the living room. She then ran to turn off the ceiling light in the living room, leaving only a pale yellow wall lamp on. She then picked up a small tray and went to Eric's side. Putting the tray on the coffee table, Elizabeth Hurley's grayish-green eyes shone. She snatched the apple and fruit knife from Eric's hand and threw them to the side. She handed Eric a wine glass and picked up another one for herself. However, she sat on the coffee table in front of him. She raised her glass in a wild manner and said, "Cheers." Eric smiled and took a sip. The wine was slightly sour, but the taste was mellow and long. Eric held the wine glass and looked at the gorgeous lady who was rubbing her toes against his leg. "Has anyone ever told you which color suits you best?" "Not really. I usually prefer casual clothes. However, Eric, what color do you think it should be? Red, passionate, wild, and blooming. Very few women are suitable for red, but you are definitely one of them." Elizabeth Hurley looked at Eric seductively and said, "That's considered a compliment, right?" "Of course." Eric nodded. Elizabeth Hurley pretended to be regretful and said, "I do have a red gown, but unfortunately, I can't show it to you immediately." "It's all right. There will be plenty of opportunities." "That's right. There will be plenty of opportunities." Elizabeth Hurley finished the red wine in one gulp and threw the wine glass to the side. She leaned back slightly and placed her hands on the coffee table. "However, Eric, is there not much time left today?" "Oh, it's only 8 o'clock. I didn't expect you to have so much confidence in me." Elizabeth Hurley, of course, understood Eric's double entendre. She smiled charmingly and said, "What did someone say in the car? I'm looking forward to it. I think of the contestants on Project Runway this afternoon. To be honest, when I was young, I also had the idea of becoming a fashion designer." "Oh," Elizabeth Hurley replied, not understanding. Then, she saw Eric stand up and pick up the fruit knife she had just thrown aside. Then, he came over and pushed her to lie on the coffee table. Elizabeth Hurley was nervous and asked in a trembling voice, "AI, Eric, what are you doing?" Eric smiled and pressed her waist. "Don't move, baby. I want to study the structure of this dress." As he said that, Elizabeth Hurley felt the cold blade against the skin of the neckline of her black dress. The soft sound of the silk fabric being cut could be heard. Looking at the focused expression of the man above her, Elizabeth Hurley was slightly relieved. She was sure that he would not cut her. However, she soon felt that it was a pity for her dress. She complained, "Eric, what am I going to wear tomorrow if you ruin this dress?" "We'll talk about tomorrow's matter tomorrow." "All right." Feeling the cold blade sliding down her chest and the dress being cut from the middle, Elizabeth Hurley felt a sense of excitement in her heart. However, she refused to be outdone and said, "Eric, I think you're not being violent. You're a pervert." "Oh, maybe." Eric's knife skills were obviously quite good. The black dress quickly turned into a square piece of fabric. The perfect neodymium body was spread out on the coffee table that was covered with a black tablecloth like a special offering. Amidst the woman's soft moans, Eric played with the perfect handicraft given by the creator. Then, he picked up the red wine on the tray next to him and poured it. The warm morning sun shone on his body. Eric sat in the open-air garden on the rooftop, reading today's newspaper and eating breakfast slowly. Today was July 19th, Wednesday. It had been 6 days since the 2 new films, Night at the Museum and Evaporation Order, were released last week. Although the detailed data had not been seen yet, most of the media was already excited by the box office of Night at the Museum. Despite being squeezed by a group of new and old films, Night at the Museum still managed to get close to $60 million in box office in 3 days. It was expected that the box office in the first week could even exceed $80 million, or even $90 million. The production cost of this film was only $70 million. Arnold Schwarzenegger's action blockbuster, Evaporation Order, which was released at the same time, cost $100 million. However, the box office of this film was only $25 million in the first weekend, which was less than half of Night at the Museum. At this time, most of the media recalled Eric's initiative last year to reduce the salary of stars and reduce the production cost. No one had forgotten that at that time, the other film companies maintained an ambiguous attitude of neither support nor opposition. It was Time Warner who first broke the deadlock and compromised with a group of big-name stars. In order to express their determination, they signed several high-budget films such as Future Waterworld, Secret Order of Evaporation, and Thief of Fire in one go. At this time, the production cost of Future Waterworld of $175 million was compared to the dismal box office results of less than $40 million. This had caused Time Warner's stock price to fall by more than 10% recently. Although strictly speaking, the box office of Evaporation Order was not a failure, at least it was much better than the previous Fair Game. However, compared to any film in the Firefly system during the summer, especially Night at the Museum, the box office of Evaporation Order could only be described as dismal. On Friday, Time Warner's last film of the summer season, Thief of Fire, which also cost $90 million, would also go up against MGM's James Bond, The Golden Eye, which was about to fall under the Firefly system. As early as last year, the Easter egg of this 007 film had already appeared at the end of Breakin' Girls, which caused a lot of commotion. It could be said that fans had been looking forward to it for a whole year. Moreover, there were rumors that this year's James Bond, The Golden Eye, would also have an Easter egg of Breakin' Girls 2 at the end of the film. This news directly made fans of both the 007 and Breakin' Girls series excited. It could be imagined that in the face of this highly anticipated blockbuster, the 3-hour Thief of Fire had no competition at all. At this time, other than the undisguised ridicule, not many people in the media paid attention to Time Warner, which was destined to fail miserably at the box office this year. Many people's eyes were focused on Flower Pictures, which was in the final stage of acquisition negotiations with MGM. Everyone knew that Firefly was behind Flower Pictures. Once Flower Pictures completed the acquisition of MGM, it was almost equivalent to Firefly owning 2/7 of Hollywood's territory and maintaining their influence on Fox at the same time. As for Sony Columbia, no one thought that this Japanese-owned film company could escape from Firefly's shadow. Chapter 737. While he was thinking about this, Elizabeth Hurley pushed open the glass door of the rooftop and walked over with her breakfast. The girl was simply wrapped in a very short white bathrobe, revealing 2 seductive long legs. Her brown hair was loose, her thin lips were slightly pursed, and her eyes were languid. She exuded a different kind of seductive aura. "Morning, Liz." Eric did not hide his appreciation for a moment and greeted her. "Morning, Eric." Elizabeth Hurley nodded with a reserved smile and sat down next to Eric. Compared with yesterday's gorgeous makeup, Elizabeth Hurley was only wearing light makeup at this time. She didn't even put on lipstick. Eric noticed that Elizabeth Hurley was more in line with his aesthetic standards than the image in his memory. At least, she must have undergone lip enlargement surgery later. Because Westerners regarded lip enlargement as beauty, many female stars had undergone similar plastic surgery. However, Eric was not interested in lip enhancement. At least, he did not have any similar women around him. Nicole once wanted to have her lips enhanced, but she was stopped by Eric. The girl's perfect small mouth was the most beautiful in Eric's eyes. Why did she have to have a weird sausage mouth? Over the years, there were no similar female protagonists in the movies that Eric had directed. This had also caused the aesthetics of women in Hollywood movies to unknowingly change under the influence of Eric's personal preferences in recent years. Perhaps in a few years, under the continuous bombardment of various movies and TV series, people's aesthetic would completely change. The aesthetic trends of the general public had always been constantly changing with the trend of the media. "Eric, what are you looking at?" Elizabeth Hurley noticed Eric's gaze and asked curiously. Eric said, "The shape of your lips is very beautiful." Elizabeth Hurley smiled and said, "Thank you, but my agent has always felt that it's not sexy enough." She even suggested that I have lip enhancement surgery. I think women with thick lips are ugly. No, everybody likes it, said Elizabeth Hurley, in astonishment. Eric shrugged. I don't like it anyway. Elizabeth Hurley hummed in acknowledgement. She originally wanted to listen to her agent's suggestion and book a minor surgery in the near future. However, at that moment, she dismissed the idea in her heart. Eric finished his breakfast and continued reading the newspaper. He casually chatted with Elizabeth Hurley. What have you been up to recently? Elizabeth Hurley raised her head and thought for a while before saying, Recently, I only have one job, which is to be a judge on America's Top Model. And then, not for the time being, Elizabeth Hurley replied. She originally planned to use the opportunity of participating in America's Top Model to contact Cindy Crawford and see if she could recommend her to this year's Victoria's Secret show. However, Eric had completely blocked her idea yesterday. In Hollywood, most of the workers were frequently in a state of unemployment. In fact, the modeling circle was similar. Even the top supermodels could not have a job all year round. Of course, the top supermodels no longer needed to worry about their livelihood, but more ordinary girls who had just entered the industry did not have it so easy. In order to maintain the high cost of living in the metropolis, they had to find various part-time jobs to support themselves while waiting for job opportunities. On the other hand, Elizabeth Hurley was the kind of model that was neither too good nor too bad. With her own fame, she already had a good reputation. Although she had the title of a supermodel, she had never been a professional model. In recent years, in order to develop in the film and television industry, she had neglected work related to modeling. Thinking of this, Elizabeth Hurley looked up at Eric and recalled the bottle of red wine worth tens of thousands of dollars that he had casually poured on her body last night. She was inexplicably looking forward to it. However, she was also a very smart woman. If the two had not slept together, she would definitely have given up being reserved and boldly asked Eric for a chance. However, at this time, if she did so, everything last night would become a transaction. Therefore, this kind of thing could only be initiated by a man. Even if Eric did not say anything, she would not be stupid enough to take the initiative to ask. Eric responded and did not seem to notice Elizabeth Hurley's eyes. He continued to look down at the newspaper. After breakfast, it was just past 8 o'clock. The staff of the Firefly Group in New York happened to send a bag of things to Eric. Try it. I asked someone to buy it. Eric found a script in the bag and handed the rest of the things in the bag to Elizabeth Hurley, who was still wearing a bathrobe. Elizabeth Hurley took the bag and opened it to take a look. She thanked Eric and turned to go back to the bedroom. When she came out again, she was already wearing a wine-red dress. Eric, who was sitting on the sofa and flipping through the script, turned his head and glanced at it. He smiled and said, "Very nice. It's much prettier than the one last night. I told you, red suits you very well." Elizabeth Hurley's face was slightly red. Although everything last night had been cleaned up, there was still a faint smell of wine in the living room. She walked to Eric and sat down gracefully. She asked, "Eric, did you pick this? It's very beautiful and it fits me very well." "Yes." Eric nodded. He had directly asked someone to pick out the clothes for Elizabeth Hurley. How could it not fit? Noticing the girl who was leaning on his side inadvertently glancing at the script in his hand, Eric handed it over and said, "Here, take a look." Can I?" Elizabeth Hurley pretended to be surprised and took it from Eric's hand. She glanced at the name of the script, Trump Card Spy. She quickly glanced at the outline of the script and was immediately disappointed. She had already acted in many movies and TV series. Although many of them were small roles, she still had a good eye. The script in her hand was probably a lowbrow comedy with a production cost of 10 to 20 million. In this kind of movie, even the female lead was usually just a vase. Although she knew that if she wanted to enter Hollywood, most of the time, she would have to start as a vase. However, this script from Eric was somewhat below her personal expectations. Eric handed the script to Elizabeth Hurley and got up to change his clothes. He was going to the set of Project Runway. This morning, they still had to discuss the adjustment plan for the show. After changing his clothes and returning to the living room, Eric looked at Elizabeth Hurley, who seemed to be focused on the script in her hand. He smiled non-committally. He had just casually flipped through the script while the girl was changing. To be honest, he was not interested in the script at all. It was just a pure spoof comedy. He believed that Elizabeth Hurley would definitely not be interested in it. "Liz, let's go. I'll send you to work first. You can take the script back and read it. If you're interested, the female lead is yours." Elizabeth Hurley picked up her handbag and got up. She thought about it and followed Eric out. When they reached the elevator together, she made up her mind and said, "Eric, I don't really like this role. Also, it seems that there are a lot of scenes." Elizabeth Hurley thought very clearly. If she accepted the role now, although it was offered by Eric, it might all turn into a transaction. Perhaps the two of them would not have any contact in the future. Moreover, this role might not necessarily help her career much. If she rejected it, with the intimacy brought about by last night's pleasure, this powerful man might bring her more unexpected opportunities in the future. Eric was a little surprised. However, he immediately understood Elizabeth Hurley's thoughts and did not mind it too much. He still liked smart women who knew when to stop. Moreover, the women around him were scheming, so it would not affect him much. If that's the case, then forget it. Eric smiled and said, "Actually, I don't like this script either." Elizabeth Hurley waved the script in her hand and said, "Then why are you still?" "Because it can make money." Eric smiled bluntly and said, "I'm the boss of a film company. I can't veto some film projects that can bring profits to the company just because of my personal preference." Elizabeth Hurley smiled. She also knew that no one could act completely based on their personal will. Of course, for a big shot like Eric, his degree of freedom was definitely much higher than that of ordinary people. Although he had just said that, if Eric really did not like this project, he could just reject it casually and it would not have any impact on the huge Firefly group at all. The two of them went downstairs and got into the luxury car waiting in the parking lot. Eric asked again, "Speaking of which, do you think you can change your accent?" Elizabeth Hurley had a very standard British accent. She even played the role of the Queen of England in the original Space-Time with this accent. When she heard Eric's words, Elizabeth Hurley said without hesitation, "If it's necessary, of course, it's not a problem. If you can learn a standard Manhattan accent and are willing to act in a TV series, there will be a good opportunity next year." "Next year?" Eric nodded and said, "Yes, next year." Elizabeth Hurley was not willing to act in a TV series, but she still asked very cautiously, "Eric, can I ask first, what TV series is it?" "It's probably about a female fashion writer in Manhattan. I can guarantee that if you get this role, your future prospects will definitely be better than in Hollywood," Eric said. He was, of course, referring to the City on Desire that had caused a huge response. At this time, the copyright of the original novel of this TV series had been bought by the production department of Firefly. However, Eric had not disclosed the specific production plan to the relevant personnel for the time being. The core female lead in the original version was Sarah Jessica Parker. Because of this TV series, Sarah Jessica Parker even became the symbol of the entire Manhattan. This showed how influential City on Desire was. However, Eric was not interested in the original female lead. Elizabeth Hurley, who was beside him, was suitable for the female lead in terms of age and appearance. Of course, the only obstacle was her accent. If she could not change it, even if City on Desire was a success as expected, the female lead with a London accent would definitely not become the symbol of Manhattan, and the impact would be much smaller. Elizabeth Hurley, of course, would not be moved by Eric's words, but she would not doubt Eric's judgment either. This man had no reason to fool an insignificant woman like her. After thinking about it, she said, "Then, I'll find some time to sign up for an oral class." She thought very clearly that something like an accent would definitely not be her personal advantage. Although many Hollywood actors were interested in learning the British accent in order to act in British movies, she did not have the acting skills to act in Shakespeare's plays. Eric nodded and sent Elizabeth Hurley to her destination. He quickly returned to the set of Project Runway. On July 21st, the last two blockbusters of the 1995 summer season, 007, The Golden Eye, and Thief of Fire, were released as scheduled. After 3 days of box office competition, 007, The Golden Eye, with more than 2,800 canvases, collected $29 million in box office in the first weekend. Although this result was still not enough to beat Amazing Night at the Museum, it left Thief of Fire, which had the same number of screenings, far behind. After 3 days of release, Thief of Fire only earned $8.4 million in box office in the United States. Although it had a good reputation, it was still difficult for the movie to recover its cost in the box office. Warner's could only hope for the release of the movie in the future. Compared to the two new movies, Amazing Night at the Museum was extremely eye-catching. After the first week's box office of more than $86 million, the box office of the second week only dropped by 20%. In 3 days, it earned $47.7 million again, firmly occupying the first place in the box office rankings. Compared to Game of Bravehearts, which had a very similar theme and special effects, this result surprised many people. At the end of last year, the total box office of Game of Bravehearts was only a little more than $100 million. However, Amazing Night at the Museum had accumulated more than $130 million in box office in 10 days. It was completely another big dark horse of the summer season. Although the box office of 007, The Golden Eye, also met expectations, compared to Amazing Night at the Museum, it could only be a disappointment. Although MGM was a little biased towards 007, The Golden Eye in the announcement, they could not reverse the situation at all. The 007 series was the last bargaining chip of Credit Lyonnais. They had hoped that the sequel would be a big success, so as to raise the transaction price. However, compared to Amazing Night at the Museum, they had no confidence at all. Therefore, after the box office of the first weekend was released, news came from Los Angeles that Credit Lyonnais had finally agreed to the acquisition agreement of Flower Pictures. Chapter 739. Taking advantage of the gap between the start of the conference, Eric gathered Amy Pascal and other MGM shareholders who attended the conference to communicate about the idea of additional stock issuance. Amy Pascal and others naturally had no objections. Although MGM seemed to be thriving after the completion of the integration, the capital chain was very tight. With a debt of $1.7 billion, the principal and interest due every year would be no less than $200 million. Another reason why Correa repeatedly sold MGM was that he wanted to continuously restructure the debt through the sale to achieve the goal of reducing expenses. After this transaction, Correa was completely driven out of Hollywood, and the new MGM certainly could not play this kind of capital game again, so these principal and interest expenses could not be saved. If an additional 20% of shares could be issued, the financial situation of the company would be greatly improved. At the same time, there would be sufficient funds to repair MGM's production and distribution system, and to start the production of The Lord of the Rings and other major series. After discussing this matter, the staff announced the start of the conference. Everyone left the lounge and walked into the conference hall. In addition to the creators of the Break and Doll series, the protagonists of the new companies 007, Mission Impossible, Night at the Museum, Resident Evil, and other major series were all present today. The scene could be described as star-studded. However, they were not destined to be the protagonists today. The reporters at the scene focused all their attention on the shareholders and executives of MGM. As the CEO of the new company, Amy Pascal went on stage in high spirits and spent more than 10 minutes to introduce the general overview of the new company. At the same time, she answered a series of recent media concerns about the acquisition and integration of MGM. More than 100 invited reporters were patiently waiting for the question and answer session after the speeches of several MGM executives. Some people's eyes had fallen on Eric sitting in the guest seat more than once. However, when Amy finally announced that MGM would be issuing additional shares, all the reporters at the scene immediately perked up. In recent media predictions, many people felt that MGM would choose to privatize like Firefly, which was also in line with Eric Williams' usual style. What's more, MGM currently only had 12% of the outstanding shares, so it was very easy to choose to privatize. Therefore, this piece of news, which was very different from most of the media's speculations, made all the media present boil with excitement. They all questioned MGM or Eric Williams's intentions for making this decision. Unfortunately, after Amy's speech, Frank Marcoso, who had been changed to MGM's president, went on stage again. He introduced MGM's production plans for the next few years and invited the celebrity guests to come on stage for a simple interaction. After a full half an hour, the media's anticipated Q&A session finally arrived. When Eric, Drew, Amy, Frank Marcoso, and John Carrier took their seats on stage, the host announced the beginning of the Q&A session. All the reporters raised their hands in an uproar. The host randomly picked a reporter. This was a woman with wavy brown hair and rimless glasses. She took the microphone but didn't immediately ask the question that everyone was concerned about. Instead, she pointed at Eric and said, "Mr. Williams, I'm a reporter from the New York Times. According to public news, Firefly Group has completely withdrawn from MGM. So, what identity and position are you sitting here today?" Eric smiled. He had already expected that he might be asked this question. Moreover, many people were well aware of the deeper reason. However, Eric didn't intend to avoid it. He smiled and replied, "If you must have a reason, I should be considered as a shareholder representative of MGM. My personal Firefly Investment Company is the largest shareholder of LTD Group. LTD Group is the third largest shareholder of MGM, currently holding 10% of the shares." That's it. The female reporter from the New York Times asked, "Mr. Williams, why did you complicate this matter? Wouldn't it be simpler to directly use Firefly Group's capital to operate this matter?" Although many large enterprises in North America had monopolistic practices, the executives of any enterprise would not publicly discuss the company's monopolistic practices. They would not even admit the intention of monopolizing, because any of these words could become evidence of the company's antitrust investigation in the future. Eric certainly knew the rules. He pretended to ponder for a moment and said, "Firefly Group's internal system is already large enough. If it continues to expand, it will appear very bloated. This is very detrimental to the healthy development of the company. Therefore, MGM is completely independent of Firefly Group system. The possible competition between the two sides in the future can also prevent Firefly Group from losing its initiative and becoming arrogant and lazy." The reporter couldn't find any fault with this half-truth answer. The next questioner could only lead the topic to MGM's upcoming stock issue. "Mr. Williams, why did MGM decide to increase its stock issue instead of privatizing it?" Eric's current personal wealth had accumulated to an amazing level. In the next few years, with the explosion of the internet wave, his personal wealth would be even more shocking. Therefore, he now no longer pursued rapid growth of wealth, but expanded the influence and control brought by this wealth. Just like MGM, Eric only indirectly controlled 10% of MGM shares through LTD, but he could completely control the company. At the same time, because he only held a small amount of shares, the resistance from the outside world would be much lower. To turn Hollywood into his own kingdom, Eric would use a similar method in the future to gradually invade other media groups. Of course, these words definitely couldn't be said. It would definitely make many people uneasy. Therefore, in the face of this question, Eric only replied, "Every company should have its own independent development path, so I don't think this is a problem. The reason why we are issuing more shares is to allow MGM to develop better in the next few years. As you have just seen, MGM will continue to film James Bond, Mission Impossible, and other series. At the same time, they will start the production of Tolkien's epic, The Lord of the Rings series. All of these require a lot of funds." Mr. Williams, 007, The Golden Eye, also had an Easter egg from the second movie of the Breakin' series. Movie fans have been paying close attention to it. Will MGM allow 007 and Breakin' to overlap in the future? Hearing this question, Eric smiled and handed the microphone to Amy Pascal, who was nearby, and said, "Let Amy explain this question to everyone." Amy Pascal and the others were ignored for a while. Of course, they were not dissatisfied with Eric attracting all the attention, but it was inevitable that they were disappointed. Seeing that Eric took the initiative to hand the microphone over, Amy knew that he was also hinting to the reporters at the scene. She gave Eric a grateful look, then picked up the microphone and said, "The company has already discussed this question in detail. Our plan is to use the next 10 years to create a special agent movie universe that belongs to MGM. MGM's 007 series, Break-In series, Mission Impossible series, and other special agent movie series may be developed in the future. Soon, everyone will be able to see James Bond, Charlie's Angels, and Ethan Hunt appear on the same screen at the same time. Special Agent Movie Universe. Other special agent movie series? James Bond, Charlie's Angels, and Ethan Hunt appear on the same big screen at the same time." There was a brief moment of silence among the reporters as they digested Amy Pascal's words. Then, they quickly reacted and the scene erupted again. Thunderbolts and Mission Impossible were undoubtedly the most popular secret agent movies in recent years. The 007 series was even more well-known. In the past, there might have been some spoof B-grade movies that crossed with other movies, but there had never been a case of a blockbuster forming a crossover episode. One had to know that this kind of crossover not only involved the movie's copyright, but also whether the relevant lead actors were willing to act in it was a very big problem. Just the possibility of the 007 series and the Break-In Beauties series crossing paths had already made a lot of movie fans look forward to it. MGM was ambitious to create a so-called secret agent movie universe. Just the thought of it made some of the reporters, who were also movie fans, very excited. After a moment of silence, the cameras flashed wildly again. The impatient reporters threw aside the rules and loudly asked questions. "Ms. Pascal, could you please explain the Agent Cinematic Universe plan in detail?" "Ms. Pascal, has MGM discussed this with Pierce Brosnan, Kevin Costner, and the 3 female leads in Break-In Beauties? Isn't MGM worried that this plan will affect the 007 series brand?" The scene was in chaos. It wasn't until the staff shouted to maintain order that everyone calmed down again. Then, everyone began to ask Amy about the secret agent movie universe. Eric also pushed the questions that fell on him to Amy and the others. He was happy to leisurely watch everything that was happening. Agent Cinematic Universe was no doubt derived from the later series of Marvel Cinematic Universe, DC Cinematic Universe, Monster Cinematic Universe, and so on by Eric. In his previous life, the 007, Break-In Beauties, and Mission Impossible series all belonged to different movie companies. It was impossible for them to cross over. However, things were different in this spacetime. Eric had accidentally realized a few days ago that these famous secret agent movies from the original spacetime would all belong to one movie company with the integration of MGM. Other than these 3 movies that had already been produced, even the copyright of the Bourne series was in the hands of Flower Pictures. Then, the possibility of creating a secret agent movie universe that belonged solely to MGM was very high. Although the backgrounds of the different series were different, this wasn't a problem at all. Other than the slightly different Bourne, the core of the other secret agent blockbusters plot was no more than one word: save the world. As long as they followed this theme and created a complete world background, then put all the major series into production. They would start with the solo movies and eventually form an intersection. They would work together to deal with a big villain and complete the mission of saving the world. The entire story would be complete. At the same time, the intersection of the major secret agent movies would bring more popularity and influence to these series. Behind all of this, of course, was a huge economic benefit. As expected, when MGM announced at the press conference that they would create an independent secret agent movie universe with the 007 series, Break-In Beauties, and Mission Impossible series, the next day, the North American media and even the world's media began to boil over. James Bond, Charlie's Angel, and Ethan Hunt, these secret agent heroes will appear on the same screen. I have to say, just thinking about it gives me a strong urge to go to the cinema. I hope MGM can really create a perfect series. I'm very doubtful of the feasibility of this plan. With the success of the 3 major movie series, Pierce Brosnan, Kevin Costner, and The Break-In Beauties have already earned tens of millions of dollars. If the 5 of them are combined, just the amount of money spent on the movie alone will be a very scary number. It's hard to imagine how much the budget of the complete movie will be if there is an intersection. Perhaps, when the movie is released in the future, the global box office of the movie will have to reach $1 billion to recoup the cost. This is no doubt a very stupid idea. I really don't know if Eric Williams has been blinded by his own success. The Secret Agent movie universe is an intersection of 3 blockbusters with unlimited potential. If he is not careful, the reputation of the 3 series will be destroyed at the same time. Maybe this is just a gimmick thrown out by MGM. After all, they are about to implement the stock increase plan. While the media was reporting, the Yahoo Online forum was also filled with discussion. However, compared to the various opinions of the media, the movie fans were very unified in their expectations of the movie. Following that, the box office of James Bond, GoldenEye, which was currently in theaters, showed a significant increase. The audience went to the cinema again to look for the details of the intersection between the movie and the other series. In the 3rd week, the agency originally predicted that the box office of James Bond, GoldenEye would fall below $20 million. However, with this news, the box office of GoldenEye increased significantly in the new week, earning $23 million. The total box office successfully exceeded $100 million, easily breaking the total box office of the original movie. In the next few weeks, the total box office could even be pushed to $150 million. Chapter 740. With the stimulation of a series of good news, MGM's stock price had risen from $10.50 before the summer break to $13.70 after the press conference. After the completion of the integration of the 3 companies, the total share capital of the new MGM reached 365 million shares. When the stock price reached $13.70, the market value of MGM successfully exceeded $5 billion. Therefore, the next 70 million shares increase plan would bring MGM about $1 billion in cash. With this fund, MGM would also completely get rid of the shadow of debt that had been entangling them and embark on a path of positive development. The stock increase would be completed by MGM executives in the next few months. After the press conference, Eric divided some of his energy and began to plan for the MGM Agent movie universe. Both Thunderbolts and Mission Impossible were special agent movies that rose to prominence in the past 2 years. Although they were both adaptations of old TV series, they didn't receive much opposition when they were added to the special agent movie universe. Instead, they aroused a lot of anticipation among the fans. However, Eric's addition of the 007 series to this plan caused some controversy. Most of the focus of the controversy was that this plan might dilute the brand effect of the 007 series. The media also specifically interviewed the previous 007 actors. The first 007 actor, Sean Connery, publicly expressed his opposition to this plan, claiming that MGM was messing around. Eric just laughed at these objections. So far, the original 007 novels, except for Casino Royale, had all been filmed before 1987. Moreover, many of the series before 1987 had little to do with Ian Fleming's novels. In order to prove their pedigree, the title of almost every episode of the 007 series was used to a far-fetched connection with Ian Fleming. It was either the name of Ian Fleming's pet, the name of Ian Fleming's holiday cabin, or a sentence in Ian Fleming's novel. Ironically, the only 007 series that had grossed more than $10 at the global box office, Skyfall, the title of the sequel had nothing to do with Ian Fleming. Instead, it was the title of the MGM scriptwriter at the time. In Eric's view, this kind of far-fetched conclusion was almost completely unnecessary. The biggest advantage of the 007 series was actually its global popularity over the past few decades. As for the box office appeal, the previous James Bond, License to Kill, only grossed $34 million in North America. It could be seen that the box office appeal of the 007 series was not that high. If you could not make a good story, no matter how famous you were, the audience would not buy it. The reason why Eric came up with the idea of the secret agent movie universe was actually because of the influence of Daniel Craig's version of 007 in the original spacetime. In the original spacetime, Casino Royale was undoubtedly one of the best films in the 007 series before and after the new era. Although the 007 series liked to flaunt its bloodline, most of the time, it was used to creating a new story for every episode. Often, it would completely throw away the fame that some of the previous characters had accumulated. This was a very regrettable waste. Daniel Craig's version of 007 took a different path. In Eric's view, the appearance of this path was very coincidental. After the success of Casino Royale, MGM could not wait to start the production of the sequel. But unfortunately, the production of the sequel happened to coincide with the Hollywood writers' strike in 2008. There was no way to gather famous writers to create a new story like before. In desperation, the production team could only piece together bits and pieces on the basis of Casino Royale to create a sequel to Casino Royale, which was Quantum of Solace. The audience who had not watched Casino Royale would not even understand the plot of this sequel. Therefore, it was conceivable that MGM did not have any expectations for this sequel at all. But surprisingly, this sequel, that confused many audiences, created a global box office of nearly $600 million, which was comparable to its predecessor. So, starting from Quantum of Solace, MGM seemed to have been enlightened. They no longer completely broke away from the story of the previous episode in every episode, nor did they rack their brains to find a big villain for Bond in every episode. They no longer forced the story to be related to Ian Fleming for the so-called bloodline. Instead, they got rid of the various constraints of the past and created a hidden storyline that ran through several sequels. Under this change, the subsequent Skyfall created a peak in the history of 007, with a global box office of $1 billion. Although the later Ghost Gang received bad reviews, it also received a global box office of nearly $900 million. Inspired by the Daniel Craig 007 series, Eric planned to cut out the subsequent films by Pierce Brosnan, such as Choose Another Day to Die and Tomorrow's Empire. He abandoned the idea of looking for villains all over the world and used the Ghost Gang as the ultimate boss. He pulled Charlie's Angel and Ethan Hunt into this big background story to create a complete secret agent movie universe. At the beginning of this story, Eric set it as the only novel by Ian Fleming that had not been adapted to the big screen, Casino Royale. GoldenEye would also be the last film related to 007's old enemy, the Soviet Union. Of course, while thinking about the storyline, MGM also had to solve another problem, which was a lawsuit that had entangled the 007 series for decades. More than 30 years ago, the villain organization, Ghost Gang, that appeared in Ian Fleming's novel was actually based on the setting in the novel by another novelist, Kevin Mike Gaylor. After a long lawsuit, the copyright of the Ghost Gang was awarded to Kevin Mike Gaylor. In order to set the Ghost Gang as the ultimate villain of the MGM secret agent movie universe, MGM had to solve this copyright problem. Of course, perhaps in the past, MGM was not willing to pay millions of dollars in copyright fees. But at this time, when it came to money, it was not a big problem for the current MGM. Kevin Mike Gaylor was still alive at this time, and the copyright fee of $2 million was completely acceptable in Eric's view. After all, the Ghost Gang had appeared in 6 previous 007 films. Although MGM had not used it again in these years after the original judgment, the reputation of the Ghost Gang was completely worth the price. Throughout August, while Eric was busy with the MGM secret agent movie universe, he also took time to go to Silicon Valley in San Francisco. After some preparation, Firefly Electronics, which was responsible for the development of MP3 players and e-readers, was officially established. At the same time, Firefly Electronics also signed a secret agreement with the hard disk manufacturer, Seagate, to commission the development of micro-hard disks. Because the company did not have an official product, Firefly Electronics only set up an electronic product R&D center in Silicon Valley at this time. In Boston, Yahoo's equity reward plan was completely implemented. Except for Jeff Locke and a few other senior executives who left, Yahoo's management was basically intact. While the MP3 and e-reader R&D centers were set up, Yahoo also launched plans to build an online music store and an online ebook store. The development of micro-hard disks would take at least a year. Eric's biggest expectation for the R&D center set up in Silicon Valley was not that they could come up with a finished product as soon as possible, but that they could take the opportunity to register the complete patent copyright covering all the technology of the MP3 player in the United States and overseas. The technical content of the MP3 player was actually not that high, but as long as most of the patents were obtained in advance, then in the future, no one would be able to produce it if they wanted to. Eric could also use this advantage to seize the absolute initiative in the era of online music. After returning to Los Angeles from San Francisco, Firefly also sent news that the Wachowski brothers had completed the production of the director's debut film, Crazy Flowers, which they used for practice. Eric heard a call from Katzenberg on the plane, so after getting off the plane at Santa Monica Airport, he rushed directly to Firefly Cineplex in Praia Vista not far away and went into the screening room with Katzenberg, the Wachowski brothers, and others. Crazy Flowers told the story of a pair of gay girls who wanted to get rid of their current lives. They planned to cheat $2 million from the mafia boss and instigate internal strife in the mafia. If you stripped away the outer layer of gayness and the female lead, this was actually a typical blacklist film. Of course, because of the gay and lesbian elements, the film had a bit more charm. In the screening room, Eric finished watching the film and nodded with satisfaction. He said to Katzenberg beside him, "Based on the quality of this film, if we let the new line operate it, we might be able to recoup $5 million of production cost from the box office alone." Now, you don't doubt the ability of the two of them, right? After making films for so many years, Katzenberg, of course, did not lack foresight. He nodded and smiled. "Of course, I'm already looking forward to the two of them." The two whispered a few words to each other. The subtitles on the screen ended and the lights in the screening room came on. Eric got up and said to the Wachowski brothers, "Get ready. I hope you can bring the crew to Sydney as soon as possible. Most of the preparation work has been completed. You just need to start shooting as soon as possible." The Wachowskis were stunned for a moment before they reacted. Andy Wachowski said, "Eric, does that mean we've passed?" "Yes." Eric nodded and said, "But I'll be watching the production of The Matrix, so I hope you won't let me down." "Of course, definitely not." Andy Wachowski rubbed his hands excitedly. After talking about the filming plan for The Matrix for a while, the Wachowski brothers left in a hurry. Katzenberg brought Eric to the office and talked about another matter. "Eric, based on the current scale of the digital domain, it's already a bit difficult to support the production of Firefly and MGM. We also have many orders from other film companies. Stan and I discussed yesterday that they hope to continue expanding the number of employees in the digital domain. After MGM got on the right track, the two companies would produce no less than 5 films with CG special effects every year. According to the 500 special effects team for each film, they would need 2,500 people. At the same time, the use of CG special effects was becoming more and more widespread. Even if it was not a film with CG special effects, it still required a special effects company to handle a lot of shots. Therefore, the past few years could be said to be the golden age of special effects companies. As long as you had enough technology, there was no shortage of projects at all. And for a giant in the digital domain, it was even more prosperous. However, Eric knew that the good days of the special effects company were only a few years away. When the new era came, with the further development of computer technology and other software giants joining the ranks of special effects software development, the special effects company would quickly fall from a noble industry to a commoner class. The high-paid special effects artists now would also be reduced to technical workers. Eric had already planned to cash in on the digital domain in the next few years when special effects films were at their peak. At this time, out of consideration for the future, he could not continue to blindly expand the scale of the digital domain. Thinking of the upcoming The Matrix in Australia, Eric said, "Forget about continuing to expand in the United States. If possible, it's best to set up a branch overseas. A special effects company won't consume too many social resources. Instead, it can generate very considerable tax revenue. I think Canada, Australia, and New Zealand will be very welcoming. We can set up branches in these countries and ask for tax benefits. That's a good idea. Carson nodded and said, Then, which country do you think is more suitable for us to set up a branch in? Eric immediately thought of New Zealand. In his previous life, Vita Digital, which was as famous as the digital domain, came from New Zealand. However, Vita Studios had already been established. It was founded by Peter Jackson and a few friends a few years ago to shoot his personal movies. Although the scale was small, it had all the essentials. Although Eric would be assured to hand over the Lord of the Rings series to Peter Jackson, he would not support a special effects company that had nothing to do with Firefly. After thinking for a moment, Eric said, Let's choose between Australia and New Zealand. The Matrix, The Lord of the Rings, and other movies will be shot in these two countries. This will save a lot of energy. Well, I will communicate with Fox. After all, News Corporation is based in Australia. We can get more benefits from the Australian government through them. With that said, Eric looked at his watch. There were still more than 2 hours before he got off work, so he said to Carson, In that case, I'll go to Fox now. You go ahead. You're tuning in to the Narrate and Escape YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.